Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back to a time when central heating wasn't even a fantasy, when wolves weren't on the endangered species lists, and when surviving winter was an actual accomplishment worth bragging about. If your frostbitten lips could still form words, you're about to live through a medieval winter. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. But hey, that's part of the fun, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first frost doesn't sneak up on you. It comes in with a silence that feels ominous. The air changes, thinner, meaner, your breath starts fogging up in the morning. Curling like smoke before vanishing into the grey sky, the grass that yesterday bent under dew is now stiff and brittle beneath your worn leather boots. Somewhere nearby a dog whines and curls tighter into itself. You know what's coming, and so does the dog. You're a peasant, let's just get that out of the way. You live in a timber and daub hut with a thatched roof that leaks in 3 distinct places. Your insulation is moss and wishful thinking. No glass in the windows, just wooden shutters you close at night and hope nothing with teeth scratches at. You can feel the cold pushing in already, like it's testing your defences, just waiting for the sun to disappear so it can take the night. Your village isn't much, just a cluster of low, smoke-breathing huts near a field that's already turned hard and useless. The last of the cabbages were pulled from the dirt 2 weeks ago. The pigs were slaughtered shortly after that. The chickens still strut around like they own the place, but even they seem more reserved, puffed up like tiny feathered blimps against the wind. Everyone's quieter now. Even the children, usually a shrieking tangle of limbs and snot, stay closer to home. This time of year, there's no harvest joy. No celebration, only calculation. You watch the sky, you count the root vegetables, you listen for coughs from your neighbours. Winter isn't poetic here. It's not soft, not sparkly. It doesn't bring hot chocolate or snowmen. It brings stillness, hunger, bone-deep fatigue. It arrives not as a single event, but as a slow, creeping enemy, one that lingers for months and steals from you piece by piece. One historical fact: most peasants didn't have chimneys. Let that sink in. Your fire just sort of lives in the middle of your single-room hut, smoke drifting upward and out through a hole in the roof. If it's not clogged by snow, the upside, the smoke helps fumigate the rafters where the lice live. The downside, you're inhaling it all night. Your lungs ache by January, your eyes sting, your throat scratches constantly. But it's better than freezing to death. You spend your days watching the weather and watching your fire. Each log you burn now is one you might miss later. You think you've prepared, stacked enough wood, smoked enough meat, patched the roof, but winter always asks for more. The cold gets into places you didn't think it could. You're sleeping fully clothed now under every scrap of wool you own. There's no such thing as pyjamas. There's just layers and hope. And then there's the weird stuff. One fringe belief that floats around your village is that if you sleep too late on the morning of the first frost, evil spirits can enter your body through your mouth. So people wake early. They mumble half-remembered prayers. They sit in the cold, cross-legged, staring into the coals like they will spring into existence with enough concentration. It doesn't work, obviously, but rituals give a sense of control, even if the frost ignores them entirely. Scholars still debate just how uniformly brutal winters were across medieval Europe. Was it really as bad everywhere, every year? Some argue that climate patterns like the onset of the so-called Little Ice Age in the late Middle Ages meant earlier and harsher winters in some regions. Others say we over-romanticize or over-vilify it, that the cold varied greatly and in many years was survivable with proper preparation. But if you're living in a 14th century village in northern Europe, you don't need a debate, you need a miracle. And a dry pair of eggs. Speaking of which, your socks are soaked. The leather shoes you wear are about as waterproof as bread. And now that frost has settled into the mud, your every step crunches and squishes with this weird mixture of ice and slime. If your toes aren't already numb, they will be by evening. You glance down and realise your big toe has actually poked through a hole. You laugh bitterly. That toe probably won't make it to spring. There's something eerie about these early winter nights. They come fast, like the sun is sprinting toward the horizon. 1 minute it's late afternoon, the next it's pitch black and you're lighting a rushlight. Just a piece of dried plant stalk dipped in animal fat. It smokes like it's dying and gives off about as much light as a flickering memory. You sit by the fire, not to read or knit or journal, what are you, royalty, but just to stare into it. Sometimes, if the wind's just right, you can hear it howling across the trees like it's angry, like it's looking for something, or someone. You make the sign of the cross, not because you're religious necessarily, but because not making it feels like a risk you can't afford. Winter's coming, and it's not just a season, it's an ordeal. You won't be fighting battles or slaying dragons, you'll be doing something harder, staying alive, one freezing night at a time. You start noticing who's prepared and who isn't, that neighbour with the fat root cellar and 2 pigs' worth of salted meat. He walks a little taller, his boots look newer. He's got a smug glint in his eye, like winter's just a mild inconvenience he'll outlast while the rest of you gnaw on bark. Then there's the old widow 3 huts down, barely able to walk and with nothing but a scrawny hen and a few onions to her name. Everyone talks quietly about how she won't see spring. No one says it to her face, of course, but you all know. That kind of thing just hangs in the air like the cold. Stockpiling for winter isn't just a chore, it's gamble. You spent months preparing for this. You dried apples till they looked like wrinkled little fists. You pickled turnips in cracked ceramic jars. You strung garlic and onions like party decorations from the rafters, and you smoked enough meat to make your clothes smell like a forest fire. You even bartered a pair of old boots for a sack of dried peas. Back in autumn, you felt cautiously proud. Now, with the wind gnawing at the corners of your home, it's all starting to feel insufficient. Salted pork is your treasure, rich, greasy and powerful enough to make your mouth water just thinking about it. You slice it thin, like it's holy, and chew slowly, but you ration it fiercely. A few strips a week, if that. Most days it's pottage, a kind of peasant stew made from grains, beans, maybe a stray bit of root veg, boiled till it loses all texture and about 40% of its dignity. On better days you toss in a bone, not for meat, those are long gone, but for flavour. If the bone's still got a whiff of marrow left, it's practically a feast. Bread is your constant companion, coarse, dense, dark as bark. You bake it in batches, assuming the flour holds out. It doesn't rise much, it's flat and heavy, with a crust like a defensive weapon. It's also the first thing you run out of when your planning falls short. You've heard of richer households using spices, maybe even dried fruit. You wouldn't know. You've never seen a raisin in your life. And then there are the apples. If you stored them right, cool, dry, wrapped in straw, they might still be edible by December. Might. More often than not, they rot from the inside out. So you learn to test them with suspicion. A good one is a sugary miracle. A bad one? Well, you eat it anyway. Hunger rewrites the rules. There's a strange hierarchy to the food in your larder. The stuff you like the most is buried deepest, hidden from others and even from yourself. That last chunk of smoked sausage, that's your emergency joy ration. You plan to eat it sometime in March when the days stretch a little longer and you almost feel human again, unless you get desperate. You always get desperate. Historically, winter starvation wasn't just a fear, it was a scheduled event. In lean years, famine took hold quickly, especially in February and March, when stored supplies ran dangerously low and new crops were still months away. Scholars have debated whether the majority of medieval peasants lived in a near-constant state of malnutrition, and while some argue diets weren't quite as bleak as we think, the fact remains. If your harvest failed, your winter table was little more than a wooden slab of disappointment. And then there are the rumours. Some believe certain households make it through winter not just with food, but with actual comfort. Bacon, honey, even preserved pears. You scoff, but also wonder. Nobles? Sure. Monasteries? Probably. But that weirdly quiet family near the mill? They always seem just a bit too well fed. People whisper, of course, smuggling, thievery, black market flour. It's not unheard of. But no one asks questions out loud. That kind of talk has a way of turning into accusations, and in winter, accusations can burn hotter than firewood. Sometimes you trade. One day you part with a hand-woven scarf in exchange for a small jar of goose fat. Another day, you offer to repair someone's leaking thatch in return for a slab of hard cheese that smells like an armpit, but tastes like heaven. Bartering is less about fairness and more about who's desperate. It's cold capitalism, pun intended. And there are odd items in your larder that you barely think of until you're desperate enough to eat them. Dried nettles, old rye bread so tough you have to soak it in ale just to chew. Strange mushrooms you're only 70% sure won't kill you. One year, someone in your village tried boiling shoe leather. It worked, technically. It also gave him diarrhea for a week. He lived though, that's the important part. One fringe belief that pops up this time of year is the idea that food stored under moonlight goes sour faster. So you obsess over how your jars are sealed, how the cellar door latches, which sacks sit closest to the wall. It's not that you believe in moon rot, but you're not about to risk that last bit of pickled beetroot just to win an argument with the sky. Here's something odd. Rats seem smarter in the winter. You think they know how precious your food is. You catch one chewing through a sack of oats and you go feral. You chase it with a ladle, yelling things that aren't words. You set traps, plug holes with rags, pray to St. Gertrude, patron saint of cats and weirdly mice too. Nothing works. They always find a way. Every bite they steal feels personal, and the worst part, you're always hungry. Even when you've keyed in, you're still thinking about what's left. You calculate constantly, not just how much food you have, but how long it'll last. You divide meals in your head while chewing. You start cutting corners, thinner slices, more water in the stew, half portions just for today. Before long, that becomes your new normal. You dream about food, not big feasts or roasted boars. Your mind doesn't even reach that far. You dream about a warm loaf of soft bread, a boiled egg, a plum so ripe it explodes in your mouth. Then you wake up and chew on a cold turnip chunk like it's punishment. And in a way it is. The irony is, some of your supplies will spoil before you can use them. The apple you saved too long? Mould. Those dried beans? Bug-chewed. Your planning wasn't perfect, because it never is. Surviving a medieval winter means accepting waste, hunger, and the constant background hum of uncertainty. You sit near your fire, picking onion skin from your stew with dirt-crusted fingers, and you wonder, not for the first time, if this is the worst part. The waiting, the counting. The never knowing if what you have will be enough. You can't escape it anymore. The cold is inside everything. It's in your clothes, in your bones, even in your breath, which puffs out in little clouds that disappear almost as fast as your body heat. You've begun to understand that warmth is not a given. It's a reward, a luxury, and sometimes a memory. Every morning your routine starts with layering, not dressing. Layering. Wool over linen, old fur over wool, maybe a second layer of wool on top of that. Your outer tunic is so stiff with wear it creaks when you move, and it smells permanently of wet sheep and smoke. You wrap a scarf over your head and around your face, leaving only your eyes exposed. Mittens, if you're lucky. Otherwise, you shove your hands inside your sleeves and do everything like a cautious crab. Fur, if you can get at it, is currency in the cold. A fox pelt is prized. Rabbit is fine if a bit patchy. You once bartered a half-decent cloak lined with squirrel for a whole week of eggs. You didn't regret it. You still think about that cloak sometimes. It was ugly and smelled vaguely like vinegar, but it hugged your shoulders like a promise. You envy the blacksmith. Not for his job, his hands are always burned, and his ears are half melted from years of standing too close to the fire, but for the heat. His forge is the only consistently warm place in the village. In winter, people invent excuses to visit him. Broken nails, dull knives, mysterious bends in iron that need correcting. Anything to stand near those coals for a few minutes. He knows it too. Sometimes he makes you wait, just to enjoy the look of desperation in your eyes. Your own hearth is functional. It takes a long time to catch, and you burn through more wood than you'd like, but it's better than nothing. The fire lives in a stone pit near the centre of your one-room hut. The smoke, that goes straight up into the rafters, or sideways into your eyes, depending on the wind and your luck. There's a small hole in the roof, barely enough for the thick smoke to escape. Sometimes it works, sometimes your home feels more like a forest fire someone's trying to contain with mud. You've long since stopped noticing the smell. Smoke is everywhere, in your hair, in your bedding, in your mouth. You taste it even when you're not near the fire. But you've also noticed something interesting. Fleas hate it. Smoke drives them out. So does dryness. In summer, you're their buffet. But in winter, with the constant smoke curling through your hut, they pack up and leave. You count that as a win. You sleep by the fire, of course. Everyone does. You drag your straw mattress as close to the embers as you dare without igniting yourself. You wrap yourself in every blanket, every ragged piece of cloth you own. Your feet are always the coldest. You tuck them under the belly of the family dog, if he'll let you. He usually does. He's cold too. Here's the historical reality that might surprise you. Your house has no chimney. Chimneys won't become widespread in Europe until later. Right now, it's you and the fire, battling it out in a box of sticks and clay. And the fire is winning, in that it's trying to slowly smoke you like a ham. Some people try clever fixes, hanging pots high to catch smoke grease, propping open shutters to redirect the draft, even suspending herbs in the rafters, hoping the heat will dry them. Sometimes it works, sometimes the herbs catch fire. You learn by trial and error, mostly error. And the worst nights, they're the quiet ones. Not the nights with howling winds or sleet clawing at the shutters. No, it's the dead still, black as pitch nights that feel the most dangerous. When the wind doesn't blow, the smoke doesn't rise, it just sits, thick and oily, creeping lower and lower until you wake up coughing, eyes streaming, convinced you're dying. You stumble outside for air and nearly freeze solid in seconds. Choose your suffering. There's a fringe belief held by a few of the older villagers that keeping a fire burning too hot during winter invites malevolent spirits. They say warmth can trick the soul into leaving the body early, thinking it's spring. So some people let their fires die down at night on purpose, shivering in silence, yet trusting that suffering equals safety. You try it once, just once, never again. There's no such thing as fresh air, not indoors. It's all smoke and sweat and mildew. You open the door sometimes just to breathe, but the outside hits like a hammer. Your skin tightens instantly. Your nose runs and freezes in the same breath. The woodpile outside is a block of frostbitten misery. You bring in what you can, stacking it by the hearth where it drips onto the dirt floor. Wet wood smokes more. You pretend not to care. You wonder sometimes what it's like in a castle. Do they feel the cold up there in the stone towers? Or do they have braziers and warm cloaks and endless servants to stoke the fires? You've heard tales, tapestries to block the draught, heated stones slipped into beds, feather mattresses. Sounds made up, but you let yourself believe it. Even if it's only true for the lords, at least someone isn't suffering. That counts for something, doesn't it? Scholars argue about how warm medieval homes really were. Some claim that with the right insulation, wattle and daub, a central fire, tight thatch, temperatures indoors could stay surprisingly livable. Others say these houses were barely a step up from tents. You don't need the debate. You know what your own breath looks like while you're still indoors. And now your nose is always cold, your toes too. You move less during the day, not because you're lazy, but because every movement costs warmth. You become efficient. You sit by the fire, you mend what needs mending, you stir the pot occasionally. When nature calls, you delay as long as possible. The outhouse is a cruel joke. In the dead of winter, it becomes an icy chamber of regrets. At night, your dreams get strange. Not nightmares exactly, more like distortions. Memories of summer, of warmth, of green things. You wake confused, clutching your blanket like it can take you back. Then the cold creeps in again, casual and merciless, and reminds you where you are, but you're still here, still breathing. You manage a smile through chapped lips, the fire's still burning even if it smokes like it resents you. You warm your hands, hold them up to the flickering light and pretend you're somewhere better, just for a minute. By now you've learned that winter doesn't just change the weather, it changes the world. Roads vanish, paths you once knew by heart dissolve beneath blankets of sue and layers of slick, soul-sapping mud. The world becomes smaller, tighter, as if the cold is squeezing it from the edges inward. Travel, even the casual kind, is no longer just inconvenient, it's dangerous. You used to walk to the next village over in an hour or so, maybe trade some goods, swap gossip, visit a cousin who always seemed to have better bread. Now that same journey would take twice as long if you could make it at all. The road is little more than a strip of hardened muck slick with frozen ruts. One wrong step and your ankle's done. One wrong turn and you're just gone, lost to the white. Cartwheels stop turning, axles freeze, hooves slip on icy stone. Even animals hate the cold. The miller's donkey flat out refuses to leave its shelter some mornings, braying like it's being murdered when coaxed out. No one blames it. You wouldn't want to leave either, if your feet were bare and your job involved trudging through frost with bags of grain on your back. Frozen roads change more than travel. They alter communication. News slows down, sometimes to a full stop. What's happening 2 towns away might as well be happening on another continent. Marriages are delayed, deliveries missed, letters unread. Not that you're getting any letters, but it's the thought that counts. The fields are stallant now. All that summer bustle, the frantic planting and weeding, the shouts of children chasing crows, gone. The earth is hard and cracked where it's visible, but mostly it lies hidden under a cold white crust. The plough has been stored, The tools hang still in the shed. The only sounds are crows and the occasional unsettling crack of something settling beneath the snow. You still go out there sometimes, mostly out of habit. You stomp along the edge of the field, stare at the bare trees. Everything feels paused, but not in a peaceful way, more like something holding its breath. Historically, this dormancy was both necessary and terrifying. You couldn't grow anything. You couldn't plant. All you could do was hope that your preparation was enough to carry you through to the thaw. And every winter, some didn't make it. Some didn't plan well. Some planned perfectly, but got hit with rot, mold, or bad luck. The line between success and tragedy was paper thin and covered in frost. You're starting to feel the isolation too. In the warmer months, the village feels alive, people shouting, arguing, drinking, laughing, fighting. Now, it's muffled. You see fewer people. Most only leave their homes if they absolutely must, wrapped in so many layers they become bundles with boots. Greetings are shorter, jokes don't land, smiles are rare. Too much effort when your lips are cracked. There's one sound that breaks through the silence though. Church bells, still clanging on Sundays, still calling everyone to shuffle their frozen bodies into the chapel and pretend to focus while quietly wondering whether there'll be warm ale waiting afterward. But we're not there yet, that's another section. There's also the odd phenomenon of ice roads, rivers and canals that once frozen solid briefly become usable as roads. You've heard of it happening in bigger towns. Some even move entire market stalls onto the ice, skating goods from one end of town to the other. It's clever. It's also terrifying. Ice can crack, people fall in. Every winter, someone gets bold, takes a shortcut across the ice and ends up as a frozen cautionary tale. You've thought about trying it yourself, but you're not bold. You're hungry, cold and cautious. That's what keeps you alive. One weird little fact you can't confirm. Someone once claimed you can hear the snow falling if the night is quiet enough. You try it once, lying on your back just outside your hut, staring up at the heavy grey sky. You close your eyes, you listen, and maybe, just maybe you hear it. The tiniest hiss, like cloth rubbing against itself. It's probably the wind, or your ears lying to you, but it feels real enough in the moment. Scholars still argue whether medieval roads were truly impassable in winter. Some say the idea is exaggerated, that people got around just fine with sleds, winter boots, or just really stubborn attitudes. Others say winter turned travel into a last resort situation, something you only attempted if staying put meant starvation. You're not a scholar, but you know your boots are splitting at the toe and your knees scream every time you slip in the muck. That's your answer. If you absolutely must travel, say, to fetch medicine from the healer or deliver a message to the reeve, you take every precaution. You bundle up in every woolen scrap you own. You fill your pockets with salted nuts and dried apples just in case. You carry a staff to catch yourself if you fall, and you pray a lot. You've passed the bones of travellers before, old ones half buried under a tree, a shattered cartwheel nearby. Maybe they were caught in a storm. Maybe they just got tired and sat down, hoping to rest for a moment. That's the thing about snow, it muffles cries for help. You could be 10 feet away and never hear them. Some winters, the snow comes hard and fast. Other years, it teases light flurries that come and go without commitment. But when it truly settles in, it transforms everything. Your village becomes a white dot on a blank canvas. You feel less like a person and more like a sketch. And you start to understand something unspoken. Winter isn't a backdrop. It's a force. It reshapes the world in its own quiet, crushing way. And still, life goes on. Barely. People adapt. They huddle closer, walk slower, talk less. Fires burn lower. Food is stretched thinner. But hearts strangely stay stubborn. You start to see beauty in the frost patterns on your shutters. You listen to the snow crunch under your boots and find it oddly satisfying. The sun, when it shows itself, feels like a miracle. You stand at the edge of the road one morning, watching a group of villagers shovel a path through the drifted snow. They work in silence, steam rising off their backs. It's not camaraderie, it's necessity. But in that necessity, there's a strange kind of peace. No one's pretending winter is fair or kind, but no one's giving up either. Your days begin in the dark now, not early morning darkness, but full-on soul-sucking. Did the sun just give up? Darkness. You wake up unsure of what hour it is, and it really doesn't matter anymore. Whether it's 5 in the morning or 9, the light outside is the same. A dull grey haze that barely filters through your wooden shutters. You wait for it to get brighter, but it doesn't. You get up anyway. Outside, the village is quiet, blanketed in snow that's been packed down and muddied by dozens of half-frozen feet. The paths between houses are narrow and slick, bordered by icy walls of shoveled sludge. Nobody strolls anymore. People walk like they are avoiding traps, slow, hunched, one cautious step at a time. Everyone's had their slip, you've had yours. Your tailbone still remembers. The roads that once connected you to the rest of the world are buried beneath a thick crust of ice and snow. Travel isn't impossible, technically, but it's close. Wagons sit frozen in place, their wheels useless. Horses are stabled or loaned out only for emergencies, and even then, only the strongest can haul through this mess. Carts get replaced by sledges, dragged by hand. Everything takes longer. Everything hurts more. The silence becomes its own character. Fields lie in frozen silence, trees skeletal against the sky. The birds that once annoyed you with their constant chirping are gone. You used to curse their squawking in the morning. Now you kind of miss them. The only birds around are crows, which is never a great sign, historically speaking. The sky hangs low, heavy, like it's thinking about something awful. The clouds don't move, they just press down, casting a leaden pall over everything. The air smells sharp, metallic. If you're lucky, it doesn't snow that day. If you're not, it dumps inches of white misery onto your roof and you spend half the afternoon shoveling before it hardens into something you need a pickaxe to deal with. And here's the fun twist. You're the snowplow. You and maybe 2 other miserable villagers with bent backs and warped wooden shovels are the only thing standing between a usable road and a death trap. Your shovel is basically a slab of wood nailed to a stick. It creaks. Your gloves are soaked through in 20 minutes. And the cold makes your fingers feel like someone else's, but you keep digging, because if the road stays buried, you're cut off from the village square, from the well, from the chapel, from the blacksmith who still has warmth and ale, and maybe a few scolding jokes about your shoveling technique. You clear the path not just to walk, but to survive. The economy slows with the snow, fewer people travel, fewer goods change hands, and there's no real farming to do. So everyone gets stuck indoors more often than not. That sounds nice, until you realise what happens when you cram multiple human beings, some livestock, and all your drying vegetables into a single smoky room for weeks on end. You start to forget what fresh air tastes like. You start to learn exactly how much you hate the sound of someone chewing. Your boots crunch with every step, a satisfying sound until your foot slips on a patch of invisible ice, and you go down hard. You lie there for a second, staring up at the sky and reconsidering your life choices. Then you hear someone laugh. It's old Gernot. He's missing half his teeth and is bundled in what appears to be 3 separate cloaks stitched into one giant garment. He helps you up, slaps you on the back and mutters something that sounds like, "Should have stayed in bed." He's not wrong. One peculiar fact. During some medieval winters, roads actually improved in a weird way. When the ground froze hard enough, it became smoother and more passable, especially in marshy areas that were usually too mucky for carts. So in a twisted bit of seasonal logic, frozen swamps made for better highways, if you didn't mind the risk of the ice suddenly deciding it wasn't thick enough after all. You hear stories of people skating across rivers, even racing sleds on frozen lakes. You can't imagine having the spare time or energy for that kind of fun, but maybe that's just the cold talking. Or maybe it's because you've seen someone's foot go straight through a patch of questionable ice and heard the scream that followed. Scholars have debated how closed-off villages really were in winter. Some argue that while travel slowed, it didn't halt completely. Trade continued. Pilgrims still wandered. But for you, in your little hut with your sore back and half-frozen toes, it certainly feels like the world has gotten smaller. You haven't seen a stranger in weeks. And part of you wonders if you ever will again. You do leave the village once in a while, not far, maybe to check a trapline in the woods, maybe to visit your cousin 2 farms over and swap horror stories about how thin your turnip soup's gotten. The snow muffles sound so thoroughly that even a short walk feels eerie. No birds, no rustling leaves, no distant dogs. Just the crunch of your boots and the whisper of your breath. You wrap your scarf tighter and pull your hood down low, trying to keep the icy wind from reaching that vulnerable spot on the back of your neck. It always finds a way. The wind is personal, it knows your weaknesses, and yet every once in a while there's a strange beauty to it all. A sunrise that paints the frost in soft pinks and oranges, a stillness so complete it feels holy. A deer in the woods, perfectly still, its breath curling in the cold air. It almost makes you forget how miserable your toes are. Almost. By the end of the day, your boots are soaked through and your legs ache from trudging through snow that sometimes goes up to your knees. You drag yourself inside, shake the snow off your cloak and sit by the fire. Someone hands you a cup of something warm, probably not tea but hot water with herbs and hope. You sip it slowly, savouring the steam on your face and let your shoulders drop for the first time in hours. You've made it another day. You didn't fall through a river. You didn't break your leg on an icy path. You're still here, and in a medieval winter, that's not nothing. That's survival. At first, you think your appetite will slow down in the cold. You imagine yourself sitting by the fire, nibbling thoughtfully on a crust of bread, sipping broth like some kind of sainted ascetic. But no, the cold makes you ravenous. All the time. Your body is working overtime just to keep your blood from turning to slush, and it demands fuel. Constantly. The problem is, your diet has shriveled to the nutritional equivalent of a sad shrug. You start your mornings with gruel. Not oatmeal, not porridge. Those are words with hope in them. No, you get gruel. Thin, grey, bland. Made with barley or oats or whatever grain hasn't been eaten by mice or gone rancid. You cook it in a pot that smells faintly of last night's dinner and the dinner before that and possibly the week before that. There's a rhythm to the stirring. You scrape it off the sides, let it boil just enough to bubble up like it's protesting, then slop it into bowls. No one talks during breakfast. Partly because it's too cold, partly because there's nothing new to say, and partly because chewing with frozen lips takes real focus. You eat fast. Not because it tastes good, it doesn't, but because it's warm. Warmth is a temporary luxury and you chase it however you can. Lunch doesn't really exist anymore. Maybe you gnaw on a crust of bread if one's going stale. Maybe someone hands you a turnip and you just bite into it like an apple, pretending the crunch is satisfying. It's not. But there's something comforting about the weight of food in your hand, even if your jaw gets tired halfway through. Dinner is the event. Everyone huddles near the fire while someone stirs the pot. Again, always the pot, always the stew or soup or sludge. It's barley again, maybe with a few wrinkled beans tossed in for variety. On exciting nights, you drop in a sliver of meat. Just a sliver, a shaving, a whisper of bacon from a pig you barely remember slaughtering months ago. The flavour is distant but real, and it sends your stomach into a frenzy. You catch yourself dreaming about foods you've never even tasted. Roasted goose with honey glaze, warm milk with cinnamon, loaves of soft, steaming bread pulled from ovens you'll never see. You don't even know what cinnamon smells like, but your mind fills in the blanks. Medieval diets in winter were simple out of necessity. Fresh vegetables, gone, dairy. Maybe if your cow hasn't frozen her udders off or dried up completely. Eggs, rare, unless your chickens are feeling generous, which they aren't. You might catch one laying every now and then, but mostly they stand around puffed up like tiny judgmental snowballs muttering to themselves. You supplement your diet with dried things, apples, pears, herbs, dried leeks that rehydrate into something vaguely edible if you simmer them long enough. You add them to everything just to pretend you've still got options, and if you're lucky, or desperate, you chew on old cheese, the hard kind, the kind that could dent a table if you dropped it. It's sharp and smells like betrayal, but it gives you fat and salt, and that's all that matters. One weird little detail, ale counts as food, at least the kind you drink daily. Small beer, as they call it. It's low in alcohol and high in whatever nutrients barley and yeast leave behind. Plus, it's safer than water, which often freezes or turns questionable after sitting in wooden barrels too long. You drink it warm when you can, tepid when you must. Children drink it. The elderly drink it. Your grandmother probably gets through the day on beer alone. You hear whispers about noblemen dining on roast swan and candied fruits during winter, sipping hot wine from pewter goblets while their fireplaces blaze and their dogs lie fat and spoiled on furs. You wonder if any of it's true. You hope not. Envy burns too hot and firewood is already short. Still, not everyone's eating like you. The monastery up the hill, those monks eat better, you're sure of it. They've got cellars full of preserved fruits and honeyed breads, salt fish and pickled eggs. You caught a glimpse once helping deliver firewood in exchange for a heel of crust. The smell inside was overwhelming, herbs and warm flour, sweetened wine, actual stew with more than one vegetable. It was like stumbling into another world, a holy one apparently. Scholars argue just how dire medieval winter diets really were. Some say peasant families had a wider variety of food than we assume. that even during the coldest months, fermented, pickled and dried foods gave them more nutrients than expected. Others argue the opposite, that deficiencies wars, especially in vitamin C and protein, led to scurvy, rickets and weakened immune systems that made winter illness far deadlier. All you know is that your fingernails look weird and your gums bleed when you brush them. Not that you own a toothbrush. Sometimes you crave crunch. Not flavour, just texture. That's what you miss. Everything is soft, mushy, boiled or stale. You once tried biting into a carrot from storage. It was half frozen and made your teeth ache, but the snap was worth it. You shared it with no one. You ate it behind your hut like a criminal. And let's talk salt. Salt is everything. It preserves meat, it flavours broth, it keeps your brain interested in what your mouth is doing. You treat your salt like gold. You store it in a wooden box wrapped in cloth, and when you use it, you sprinkle with reverence. Too much and it's wasteful, too little, and your food tastes like despair. You've even caught yourself licking your fingers after eating, not for etiquette, but because those last grains of salt feel sacred. Your tongue catches the flavour and you close your eyes, pretending you've had more than you actually did. One truly cursed winter when you were younger, the food ran out early. You remember your mother boiling nettles, collecting bark from trees, even drying strips of leather and boiling them into soup. You didn't ask where the meat came from, you just ate it. You're still not sure whether that was smarter or not. And now, every winter, you prepare like it'll be that bad again. You hoard, you count, you hide things even from your own family. A crust here, a jar there, you're not proud of it. But when March comes and everyone's shivering with hunger, those secrets might be the difference between making it or not. Some nights the hunger gnaws harder than the cold. You wake up in the dark, stomach tight, mouth dry, teeth aching, you imagine food, you imagine warmth, and then you force yourself back to sleep. Because dreams are the only place the stew pot is full. You stop thinking of ale as a luxury. At some point it becomes just hydration. You don't drink water if you can help it. Not because you're fancy, but because the water in the village is either frozen solid or suspiciously murky. It comes from the well, but who knows what's crawled in, or worse, died in it. And anyway, the buckets freeze the moment you bring them home unless you set them directly by the fire, so you drink ale. Everyone drinks ale, even the kids. You start your day with a mug of weak, cloudy beer that tastes like wet bread and old barley. It's barely alcoholic, if at all, just enough to kill the stuff that would kill you. It warms your stomach a little, not much, but more than nothing, that warm buzz in your chest, that's comfort, or maybe just gas. Hard to tell these days. Brewing is a winter chore in its own right. You've watched your cousin's wife do it, hunched over a vat in the corner of their hut. She mutters to herself while stirring the mash, the steam curling around her like a protective spirit. It smells like grain and wood smoke and yeast. Not terrible, actually. She adds herbs sometimes, or old bread, or whatever's left. There's no recipe, just instinct, and once tragically dead mice. But that batch never made it past her nose, and she dumped it without flinching. You respected her more after that. Most households have their own brewing schedule. You rotate barrels. The trick is to always have something fermenting, something ready, and something you can drink today. You get used to the taste, flat, slightly sour, but familiar. Comforting even. It's not about the buzz. It's about survival. Historically, this small beer was a staple in winter diets. Because it used boiled water in the brewing process, it was safer than drinking straight from the well or stream, especially when contamination was more of a certainty than a possibility. Ale gave you hydration, calories, and a little morale boost in one brown, foamy package. It wasn't party fuel, it was breakfast. Once in a while, someone brings out the real stuff, stronger ale, thicker, darker, more flavourful. You sip it slow because you know you won't see more anytime soon. It warms you more than the fire, not just in your belly, but in your mood. You laugh a little easier, your shoulders unclench. For just an hour, the cold doesn't own you. But too much strong drink in winter? That's a gamble. You've seen what happens. Your uncle got drunk once in January, wandered outside to relieve himself and passed out in the snow. He lost 2 toes. Now he limps and curses a baby tit every time someone passes the jug too many times. Lesson learned. One fringe belief you've heard, probably from someone who'd had too much ale, is that drinking during snowfall makes your soul wander. Something about the air being too thin, the veil too light. You're supposed to stay sober on certain nights, especially during a new moon. You don't know if that's true. You've never felt your soul wander. but you've definitely felt your legs betray you on slick snow while slightly buzzed, and that's close enough. By midday, if you're lucky, there's a warmish drink waiting at home. Maybe someone's boiled up a batch of ale with some honey stirred in. That's rare. Honey is precious. But every now and then someone trades for a pot of it. You sip slowly, savouring the way it coats your throat. It almost tastes like luxury. Almost. You hear that the monastery brews a different kind of ale. Darker, heavier, they call it. You've never tasted it, but people say it's thick enough to be food. A single mug could hold you over for hours. That's probably nonsense, but you dream about it anyway. A drink that fills you up like stew? That's practically divine. Scholars argue over how widespread and nutritious small beer really was. Some insist it was a lifesaver, a source of clean hydration and calories. Others think we romanticize it, that it was more of a side beverage than a staple. But for you, here in the pit of winter, it's everything. It's the liquid thread holding your sanity together. You ration it. Carefully, you dip a mug into the barrel like a priest anointing someone. You sip. You make it last. Even the dregs, sour as they are, get used, poured into stews or drunk with a pinched nose and a whispered prayer. You try not to get drunk. No one really wants to be drunk in winter. Not here. Drunk means careless. Drunk means cold winds. It sneaks under your coat, slows your reflexes, makes you forget to close the door, makes you sleep too deeply. You don't want that. What you want is warm. And warm lives in the bottom of your mug, just enough to push back the frost not invited in. There's a strange comfort in the ritual of it. Brewing, storing, sipping, something steady in the chaos. When everything else is frozen or dying or breaking, the ale is still there, still bubbling, still waiting. It's one of the few things winter hasn't fully stolen. You think about how strange it is, this whole system. Water turns to poison, beer becomes safety. It's the opposite of how the world's supposed to work. But you've stopped questioning contradictions. You've stopped questioning much of anything. Now you just act. You survive. You drink. Sometimes, when the moon is high and the village is sleeping, you step outside with a mug in hand. The snow reflects the light in a way that makes everything feel dreamlike. You take a sip. The air bites your nose. Your breath curls into nothing. And you stand there, a small warm body in a big cold world, sipping safety by the mouthful. As soon as the sun sets, and honestly in winter, that's basically afternoon, your world goes dim. You move slower, speak softer, squint harder. Because there's no light. Not really. You don't get darkness like this in the modern world. You're not just turning off a switch or lowering the brightness on a screen. You're submerged in it, like ink poured into the air. Total black. You reach for things and miss. You speak into shadows. And then, in a small gesture of defiance, you light a candle. Or rather, you light something candle adjacent. Candles, the proper kind, fat, creamy, made from beeswax, are for rich people and the church. Your candles are stubs of tallow, leftover fat from slaughtered animals, cooled and congealed around a bit of rag. They don't smell great. Actually, they smell like you're roasting socks soaked in broth. But they glow, kind of. You place your stub in a little clay holder and set it near your seat. It doesn't light the room. It barely lights your hands. But it gives you a tiny pool of gold in the middle of the void. And that's enough to function, kind of, if you sit still. If you don't ask too much of your eyes, the candle economy is real. Wax is wealth. Tallow is necessity. And rushlights, dried reeds dipped in grease, are somewhere beneath that. They burn fast, sputter like they're offended to exist, and leave behind a smell that reminds you of wet dogs and overcooked onions. Still, you keep a bundle ready, tied with string, because once the fire burns low, your light goes with it. You plan your evenings around firewood and flame. You never want to be caught without light after dusk. That's when things go wrong, tools vanish, chamber pots get kicked, people trip and knock into sharp corners that didn't exist earlier. Darkness in a medieval winter isn't peaceful, it's an obstacle course with bruises. And here's the kicker. Candles are currency, literal negotiable currency. You've traded a handful of eggs for a single tallow taper before. You've heard of people exchanging candles for favours, for medicine, even for secrets. The longer a candle burns, the more power it holds. One long-lasting beeswax candle could buy you more respect than a full sack of oats. Historically, monasteries often had the best lighting setups, not just because they had bees and could make wax, but because they needed to read. Prayers, chants, scripture, they required light. Some monks were even allowed a candle per hour for reading and writing. You think about that with envy as you sit in near darkness. trying to untangle a fishing net with fingers you can't see. Scholars debate how much light the average peasant had access to. Some argue that we overestimate the darkness. There, with fires, torches, moonlight, and early bedtimes, people got along just fine. Others point to records showing that most homes only used one light source at a time, if any, and that peasants often shared firewood and grease with neighbours just to stretch their resources. You're living the second version. There's no fine about it. Your fire offers the most light, but it comes at a cost. Every log you burn is one less between you and hypothermia. You learn to move close to the flames. Not too close, you've singed your sleeve before, but just enough that you can use the glow to see your work. Mending clothes, cleaning tools, checking for lice, sometimes you just sit and stare into it, not because you're deep in thought, but because your brain is too tired to do anything else. You miss the sun. The real sun, that heavy golden light that used to pour through the window in the early hours of summer, hitting your face like a soft slap. Now even the midday sun feels filtered, like someone hung a wet rag over the sky. There's no warmth in it, no colour, just a pale, cold reminder of what used to be. And so you live by flicker, firelight, candlelight, rushlight. Your world is shadow and glow. You learn to read things differently, not by colour, but by shape and shine. A glint means something's wet. A blur means someone's moving. You stop trusting your eyes and start relying on memory. You keep your light sources high, when you can, hanging from ceiling beams, mounted on walls. The higher they are, the more they spread, and the less likely they are to get kicked over and set your house ablaze. That's the other reason you fear darkness. Fire, not the kind that keeps you warm, the other kind, the unstoppable kind. One night last winter, a neighbour's rushlight tipped over into a pile of straw. The entire hut went up like dry tinder. It was quiet for about 20 seconds, just confusion and a faint sizzling. Then screaming, then nothing. You still see the smoke rising when you pass that part of the village. It smells like burnt earth. And something else you try not to name. Fringe belief, time. Some folks say that spirits move in the dark corners of your home, especially during the long winter months. They cling to the walls, whisper behind curtains, hover above the bed as you sleep. Supposedly a lit candle can drive them off, but if it flickers, that's a bad sign. Some people watch their flames like oracles. You've caught yourself doing it too. You ration your candles like they're food. On some nights you go without. You sit in the dark, wrapped in every blanket you own, staring at the fire until it dies into embers. Then you lie down, not because you're sleepy, but because there's nothing else to do. Work ends when light ends, and sleep becomes your default. But even sleep is tricky. You wake up cold always. You roll over and try to find the warm side of the blanket, only to remember that the warm side is a lie. You sit up, fumble for the candle, strike the flint, and curse when it doesn't catch. The spark finally lands, the wick flares, and your face is bathed in that soft, flickering gold again. It's not much, but it's something, a tiny rebellion against the dark. The forest feels closer in winter, not physically, but in that creeping mental way, like it's leaning in. You look out past the last row of huts and the tree line seems nearer than before, its black shapes crowding the horizon like spectators at your slow-motion collapse. It's always there, just past the snowbanks, and it hums with a kind of quiet menace. You usually don't go near it this time of year. In the summer, it's a source of firewood, mushrooms, herbs, food if you know where to look. But in winter, the forest changes. It goes silent. The birds leave. The branches strip down to nothing, clawing the grey sky. And something else comes closer. Wolves. You've heard them before, late at night, when even the dogs won't bark. Long, drawn-out howls that float in through the shutters and wedge themselves into your dreams. One starts, then another joins in, then another. You lie in your straw bed, frozen in place, trying to convince yourself they're far away. They never are. By morning you sometimes find tracks, not dog tracks, bigger, heavier, padded prints pressed deep into the snow near the edge of the village. Once they came closer, 1/2 mile in, circling the chicken coop. The hens were a nervous wreck for days. One even dropped dead from shock. You don't blame it. Here's your historical reality check. Wolves were common across medieval Europe, and in harsh winters they lost their fear. Hunger does that. They came into villages, snatched livestock, sometimes even stalked travellers on the road. There are records, gruesome ones, of entire carts being found overturned, Oxen half-eaten, drivers missing. You remember a story your grandmother used to tell about a man who went into the woods for firewood and came back without his face. No one knew what happened, just that his hands were frozen, his axe was missing, and something had chewed through his jaw. Was it wolves? Spirits? Something else? She always told it with a twinkle in her eye, like it was meant to keep you out of the trees. But now, with that same chill pressing against your windows, you wonder how much she made up. And the fear is real. Not dramatic, just constant, low level. A thread of dread that tugs every time you step outside after dark. You walk faster, head down, tools clutched tighter. You check over your shoulder more often than you'd like to admit. You listen for that crunch in the snow that doesn't match your footsteps. One strange belief people whisper, especially the older ones, is that wolves can understand language. That if you speak of them out loud at night, they'll come. You've seen someone stop mid-sentence and spit on the ground just for mentioning them. You do it too now, just in case. You've also heard that some wolves aren't really wolves at all. They say in the deepest part of the forest there are men who turn when the moon is full. Not wolves exactly, something in between. You think it's superstition, obviously, mostly. Except one time, just before dawn, you saw a figure by the tree line, tall, hunched, animal-like. Too big to be a wolf, too fast to be a man. You blinked, and it was gone. You told no one. But you remember. Scholars debate how much of the wolf fear was real, and how much was exaggerated folklore. Sure, actual attacks happened, but were they common? Were they routine? Or were they just the kind of rare event that burned itself into local memory for generations? Honestly, it doesn't matter. When you hear the howling, when you see the tracks, when your dog won't stop pacing near the door, you're not thinking about historical accuracy. You're thinking about how fast you can get back inside. The village has its own defences, loose ones. Some people hang bones or feathers outside their doors, charms meant to ward off predators. You've seen a woman draw chalk runes on the snowbank outside of her house. You've heard of people burning hair in their hearths for protection. None of it seems to work, but again, just in case. And let's not forget the dogs. Every family has at least one. Yours is a half-blind mutt with one ear, and a bark that sounds more like a sneeze. But when the wolves are near, he stands stiff-legged by the door and growls in his throat like he's ready to take on the entire forest. He wouldn't last 5 seconds in a real fight, but his heart's in it, and that's enough for now. The problem is, you still need wood, still need to check traps, still need to live. So eventually, you have to go out there. You plan your walks with precision. You take the path with the least cover. You hum while you walk, not for entertainment, but so the silence doesn't drive you mad. The trees feel taller in winter, the shadows deeper. Every snapped twig might be a squirrel, or it might not. You carry a knife, not because it would help much, but because holding it makes you feel braver. You've never used it. Hope you never have to, but it's there, cold and real and ready. Once you saw a deer carcass half-eaten in the snow, torn open from the belly, the ribs were picked clean. You crouched near it for a long time, wondering how fresh it was. The snow wasn't even disturbed by birds yet. That meant recent. You stood up, turned around slowly, and walked away without looking back. And still, after all this, life continues. You chop wood, you feed the fire, you collect kindling, you scan the horizon. Because wolves or not, the cold doesn't wait. The forest doesn't care, and fear doesn't put food in your bowl. But at night, when the fire burns low and the world outside turns black and full of teeth, you lie in bed and listen. Not for wind, not for snow, but for that long, low howl that reminds you that out there, somewhere, something is hungry. It's Sunday, and you know what that means. Time to scrape yourself out of bed, pull on every halfway dry layer you own, and march through the frost to sit in a stone building that's only slightly less freezing than the outdoors, so a priest can remind you that your suffering is probably deserved. Yes, it's time for church. You'd think that during the coldest, deadest months of the year, someone would have come up with a clever excuse to cancel Mass. But no, winter does not exempt you from salvation. If anything, it makes church attendance even more important, because when the crops are dead, the livestock are sick, and your toes are slowly turning purple, that's when the Almighty is paying extra attention. You start the morning with a ritual, not of prayer, but of shivering and layering. Wool under linen, linen under more wool. A fur-lined hood if you're lucky, or at least a scarf that smells like it was last washed during the Crusades. You lace up your boots, already stiff with cold, and step out into a world so quiet it feels like the sky forgot to wake up. The path to the chapel is packed down by generations of freezing feet. Everyone takes the same route, winding between huts and past the well, the snowbanks high on either side like frozen waves. You can already see the other villagers, bundled like walking sacks of potatoes, shuffling toward the same grey stone building at the edge of the square. The chapel isn't grand. It's not even warm. It's a squat rectangle of weather-worn stone with a roof that lets in wind through the cracks. The door creaks open, and the moment you step inside, your nose is hit with the holy trinity of medieval church air. Damp stone, beeswax, and the faintest undertone of body odour. A few candles flicker at the altar. That's it. No roaring fire, no heated pews, just you, your breath fogging in front of your face, and the sound of someone coughing wetly in the back. There's a kind of intimacy in suffering together. You glance around and see your neighbours, the same ones you pass on the road, barter with at the well, and hear weeping through the walls on the worst nights. Everyone looks more hollow in the winter, cheeks sunken, eyes tired, fingers swollen with cold, but they're here, and so are you. The priest enters from the side room wrapped in more layers than you thought possible. His breath clouds around his face as he begins the service. The Latin floats into the rafters, half heard, half understood. Most people aren't paying attention, they're just trying not to fall asleep standing up, because to sit on the stone benches is to become part of the bench. You will freeze. It's not a matter of if, but when. You try to focus, you really do, but your mind drifts. You think about the frost patterns on your window, about the stew waiting back home, if there's any left, about whether your boots will survive another week, and about the 2 candles burning on the altar. Real beeswax, you'd trade your mittens for just one of them. Here's a historical nugget. Church attendance during winter was, in many areas, still mandatory. Not optional. Not if you feel up to it. It was part of your religious obligation. And while the church might forgive your sins, the village wouldn't forgive your absence. People notice who shows up. People you remember. Especially in small communities where gossip lasts longer than bread. One fringe belief that makes the rounds in winter, that spirits of the dead walk more freely in the cold months, that the veil is thinner, especially around sacred spaces. So if you don't go to Mass, you risk being mistaken for one of the wandering souls. Or worse, visited by one. Supposedly, missing, church leaves a door open, a crack just wide enough for something to follow you home. You definitely don't believe in that. Definitely, probably. But you still mutter a quick prayer under your breath every time the chapel doors swing shut behind you, just in case. The homily is about suffering today. Of course it is. Trials of the flesh, endurance, God testing your faith. It's hard not to take it personally. You shift your weight from one numb foot to the other and wonder whether God's ever stood barefoot in frozen mud for 2 hours. There's music, sort of. A hymn sung in a flat, mournful tone that makes you question whether the original composer had ever heard joy. The melody is slow, the harmonies are vague, and everyone sings like they're afraid to wake something. Still you join in, because even a grim tune is better than silence. You notice a kid sitting near the front, probably about 8 or 9, eyes closed, swaying gently, definitely asleep. No one stops him. Everyone gets it. If he falls over, someone will catch him. Or not. Honestly, if no one has the energy to care, communion is offered, and you shuffle forward with the rest. The host is stale, the wine is bitter. But for a brief moment you feel something warm. Not physically, but emotionally. Like you belong. Like you're part of something that stretches beyond your own little suffering. Some scholars argue that church provided a kind of psychological relief during winter. Not spiritual in the divine sense, but communal. A place where villagers could gather, connect, and reaffirm a sense of purpose, even if that purpose was just to endure. You think there's truth in that? You might not understand every word the priest says, but you understand the silence afterward. The shared ache, the quiet strength. The service ends with a blessing. Everyone exhales, not in joy, just in relief. The real victory of Mass isn't spiritual enlightenment, it's survival. You made it through without collapsing, freezing, solid, or saying something blasphemous out loud. You file out with the others, boots crunching on the snow, cloaks whipping in the wind. The sun, if it's even out, offers nothing but a pale suggestion of light. But you feel slightly steadier. You've been seen, counted, reminded that you're not alone in the cold. Back home, you peel off your damp outer layer and sit by the fire. You rub your hands together, still half numb or half numb. You close your eyes and try to remember one line from the priest's sermon. You can't, but that's fine. You went. You did your part, and now, for another week, your soul's as safe as it's going to get. Your skin starts to betray you in small, quiet ways. First, it's your fingers. They dry out, crack, and peel until your knuckles are raw and red, like they've been through a cheese grater. Then it's your ears, burned and brittle from the wind, flaking little bits of flesh like they're trying to disappear altogether. Eventually, it's your toes. They go numb, then tingle, then ache. You wiggle them in your boots, hoping for warmth, hoping for feeling. One morning you don't feel anything at all. You don't panic, not right away. Numb toes are just part of winter, but when you pull off your boots and see that one of them is turning grey at the edges, your stomach drops. That's not normal cold, that's something worse, that's frostbite. The word itself doesn't exist yet, not in the neat medical terms you might hope for. But the condition? Oh, it's very real. You hear it called different things: black toe, winter rot, cold's bite. All of it means the same thing. Part of you is slowly dying and you probably won't get it back. You soak it in warm, not hot, water, as gently as you can manage. You wrap it in wool. You curse your boots. And then you limp through the day like it's nothing. Because what else are you going to do? It's not like the cold will wait politely while you recover. Chilblains too, that's the other winter gift. Your hands swell and itch until it feels like ants are crawling under your skin. They burn, they sting, then they scab over, heal unevenly and come back again. You see it on everyone. Red, swollen hands with knuckles that look like cracked pottery. You try to hide yours at first. Eventually you stop bothering. There are no real cures, just suggestions. Some say to rub snow on the swelling. Others say to soak in cold water, then warm. One woman swears by goose fat. Another insists urine does the trick. You try them all to varying degrees of regret. And your nose, your poor defenceless nose, it runs constantly, even when you're not sick. It drips in the cold, then freezes halfway down your face there. You wipe it with your sleeve over and over until your cheek is rubbed raw. You can't remember the last time you looked in a mirror, probably for the best. You imagine you look like you've been slapped by the season itself. Then there's the quiet, creeping chill that settles in your joints. Your knees crack when you stand, your back stiffens if you sit too long. Your hands seize up halfway through a task, and you have to pry them open like rusted hinges. You're not old, not really, but winter doesn't care about your age. It just wants to turn you brittle. One strange belief that floats around the village is that the cold carries a kind of memory, that if you let it into your bones once, it stays there. It settles, sleeps. Then returns every year stronger. That's why the old folks shiver even on warm days. Their bodies remember what happened before. You're starting to believe it. You feel slower, heavier, like something invisible is dragging you backward. You try to stay by the fire as much as possible, not just for warmth, but to keep your circulation moving. You stretch your hands toward the flames until they ache, then pull back, then reach again. It's a dance, closer, closer, too close, pull away, repeat. You've burned yourself more than once, not from fire, but from desperation. You wrap your feet in cloth at night. Sometimes you stuff them inside warm ashes before bed. It sounds strange, but it works, until you roll over and dump soot into your blanket. You've learned to live with the mess. Clean is a summer concept. Scholars talk about the toll of cold on medieval bodies. Not just the frostbite and chilblains, but the fatigue, the slowed healing, the increased risk of infection. A simple cut takes forever to close. A bruised finger stays swollen for days. And any injury, no matter how small, becomes a liability. Because cold doesn't just hurt, it delays, it lingers, it weakens. You've seen a man lose 2 fingers after chopping wood without gloves. They turned black within days. The healer tried to save them, applied a poultice, whispered something over them. But in the end, they fell off, just dropped. You heard them hit the dirt. That sound stuck with you. And illness? Let's not even start. Well, actually let's. Because now that your skin's failing, your lungs want to join the rebellion. You start to cough, just a little, just enough to make you nervous. It echoes at night, sharp, dry, persistent. You wake yourself with it. You wake others. They don't say anything, but they hear you. You see it in their eyes the next day. Worry, distance, cold spread like rumours in the winter, quick, invisible, and mean. One sneeze in a crowded room and half the village is wheezing a week later. And once you're sick, you don't get better quickly. You linger in a state of half-illness, too weak to work, too healthy to lie down, just sick enough to be miserable. You try remedies. brewed herbs, mugs of hot ale, heated stones pressed to your chest. They help a little, or maybe you convince yourself they do. That's half the battle, belief. If you believe you're getting better, sometimes your body catches on. Sometimes it doesn't. One fringe idea that makes the rounds is that winter sickness isn't from cold at all, but from stale air. That too many people breathing in the same space, surrounded by smoke and dampness, poisons the lungs. You've heard of families digging small holes in their walls to let the bad air escape. Not exactly effective when the outside air is trying to murder you, but still, people try. You cover your mouth when you cough, not for others, but for yourself. There's something shameful about it. Like you're failing, like your body is giving up. You hide it as best you can, till hiding it becomes harder than the cough itself, and still you go on. You wrap your hands, you soak your feet, you sip hot broth and breathe steam from a cracked mug. You tell yourself the frostbite isn't spreading. You tell yourself the cough is just from the smoke. You tell yourself you'll feel better tomorrow. You probably won't, but you tell yourself anyway. The strange thing about winter isn't just how cold it is outside, it's how stale it gets inside. Your home, once a space you barely noticed, slowly transforms into a low-ceilinged box of smells, smoke, and sickly silence. The air hangs thick, unmoving, trapped in with you, and there's no escaping it. It starts with the fire. You need it, desperately, but it fills the room with a constant haze of smoke. Your eyes burn, your throat scratches. You try to ignore it, but after a few hours, everything you wear smells like you've been slow roasting over a damp log. You try adjusting the fire, cracking the shutter, poking the coals. Nothing works. It's smoke or frostbite. Take your pick. And then there's the people. Everyone huddled inside, all breathing the same air hour after hour, day after endless day. Your house is small, just a single room, maybe two if you're rich in dirt and curses. You've got your parents, your siblings, maybe a cousin or a grandparent, and probably a chicken or three for good measure. Nobody gets personal space. You shift, they shift. You sneeze. They pray it's not something worse. People start to cough, quietly at first, then more. A little chorus of illness echoing against the walls. One person gets sick, and it's only a matter of time before everyone does, because there's no way to separate, no way to quarantine. You can't exactly step outside and sleep in the snow to be considerate. When sickness comes, it moves fast. Fevers rise, sweat soak through straw bedding. The coughing gets worse, harsher, wetter. You learn to recognise the sound of someone trying not to let the rest of you know they're getting worse. It's in the way they muffle the cough into their sleeve, or walk to the door like they're just cold, not like they're trying to breathe air that hasn't passed through 7 other mouths first. You try herbs, of course you do. You hang dried bundles from the rafters, sage, thyme, rosemary if you've got it. Supposedly they purify the air, maybe they do. Or maybe you just start associating the scent of herbs with desperation. Either way, you keep them there. The healer, if your village has one, makes the rounds, bundled like a walking haystack. They visit the sick, listen to the chest, sniff the breath, poke the tongue. They might leave behind a pouch of something dry and bitter to steep in water. They might mutter a blessing under their breath. They might also shake their head and say nothing at all. You've seen people fade in winter, not in a dramatic, sudden way, but slowly. Their cheeks sink, their voices grow thinner, they sleep more, eat less, until one day they simply don't wake up. It's not always a grand, terrifying illness. Sometimes it's just everything wearing a person down at once. Here's a historical reality. Respiratory illness was the real killer in the cold months. Not just the plague or the famous medieval pandemics, but good old-fashioned lung rot, what we'd now call pneumonia, bronchitis, or tuberculosis. In a sealed room with no ventilation, full of damp straw, smoke, and human breath. Those bugs had a holiday. And the medicine, spotty at best. Some folks swear by honey and hot ale. Others suggest garlic cloves chewed raw. You've tried both. You're not convinced they do anything, but the ritual of it feels reassuring. Like you're at least doing something while your lungs stage a rebellion. A fringe belief you've heard since childhood, that demons travel on breath. That a cough releases not just illness, but something wicked. That's why people cross themselves when someone sneezes, or spit on the ground after a fit of choking. You used to think it was superstition. Now, huddled in a room that smells like damp sheep and ash, you find yourself whispering protections without even thinking about it. You also start paying attention to who's getting sick and who's not. The old? Of course, the children often, but sometimes it's the healthiest looking man who suddenly can't stop coughing, and the tiny woman who survives the winter without so much as a sniffle. There's no logic to it, no pattern, just luck or lack of it. Some scholars debate how effective medieval remedies really were. They weren't useless, not entirely. Herbs like thyme and mint have actual antimicrobial properties. Honey too, but without understanding germs, people were mostly fumbling in the dark, swinging sticks at shadows. It's easier to mock them now, but when your cousin is coughing blood and your house smells like a peat bog, superstition starts to look a lot like survival instinct. You start sleeping closer to the fire. Not for warmth this time, but because the heat seems to help your breathing. You wake in the middle of the night, chest tight, nose frozen, and inch yourself closer until the tips of your toes start to tingle. Sometimes you stay up just feeding the coals. Just watching them glow, just waiting for the coughs around you to fade. It's in these quiet hours that your thoughts get weird. You start wondering if the cold itself is a kind of illness, not just something that lets disease in, but something alive, hungry, like it seeps into your home, into your chest, and curls there. Feeding, the animals get sick too, the dog starts sneezing. A chicken dies for no reason. You bury it in the frozen garden, the soil like iron. You don't say anything. No one does. Another little loss, absorbed into the rhythm of the season. By late winter, your sense of smell is gone. Everything just smells like wet, or smoke, or the sour rot of old potatoes stacked too long in the corner. You go nose blind to your own sickness. You start to wonder if that's a mercy. You try not to think about what happens if you do die. There's no burial right away. The ground's too hard. You would be wrapped in cloth, stored somewhere cold, sometimes literally in the snow, or in a barn or near the church, waiting for the thaw. It's a grim thought, but not uncommon. The dead sometimes linger longer than expected in winter. And yet you keep going. You sweep the floor, stir the stew, boil herbs, breathe slowly through your nose. You drink hot ale and pretend it helps. You nod off in your chair, half dreaming, half listening to the fire. You cough, someone else coughs, it echoes. It's not dramatic, it's not a crisis, it's just winter. And you're surviving it. One breath at a time. Then just when everything seems completely locked under snow and silence, something strange happens. The rivers freeze. At first it's just a thin crust of ice around the banks, glinting like cracked glass. Then the edges stiffen. The current slows. One morning you wake to find the entire thing frozen over, solid and flat, as if winter has hammered at a sheet of pale stone across the water. It's beautiful, and a little terrifying. You test it with a stick, then a boot. Then two. You wait for that horrible crack that never comes, and then you do something completely insane. You step onto it. It holds. For a moment you just stand there looking down. Beneath your feet, frozen mid-motion, the water rests. Still, trapped, asleep. You can see fish shapes if you squint. You can see your own breath hovering in the air above you like a ghost. The village isn't moving, the trees are brittle statues, and for the first time in weeks you feel weightless. Cold, yes. But calm. This is a moment of medieval magic, though no one would call it that. The river in winter becomes a road, not every year and not forever. But when it does freeze thick enough, people use it. Carefully, cautiously, but still they use it. The path that once took hours to navigate along winding, muddy trails is now a smooth, direct stretch of icy silver. Sleds glide across it. Some people even skate of a sort, strapping bone blades to their boots, pushing with sticks. It's rare, and you've never seen it yourself, but you've heard the stories from travellers, swans of people slicing across the ice like it's a dance floor. Of course, you don't own skates, you barely own boots, but you drag a sled across the river one day, wood and rope heavy with bundles of dried firewood. It's easier than dragging it through knee-deep snow. It still hurts your shoulders, but at least it slides. There's an odd silence on the frozen river. Your sled makes a whispering scrape. Your boots crunch, and that's it. No birds, no wind, no rushing water. It's like standing inside a held breath. Some in the village don't trust the ice, even when it's thick. They say it's unnatural, that rivers aren't meant to stand still. They believe spirits live in the water, and when it freezes, they get trapped and angry. You're not sure you believe it, but you also don't linger out there longer than necessary. You've heard of entire fairs held on frozen rivers in big towns. Markets. Games. Even fires lit on the ice. People eating roasted chestnuts while watching acrobats perform on makeshift stages. It sounds completely ridiculous, and also unfairly like the best thing that could ever happen to a medieval winter. You imagine it at night. The whole world lit up like stars have come down to dance on the ice. You smile at the thought even as your teeth chatter. Still, rivers freeze unevenly. You learn to read the ice. White and bubbled is good. Clear and glossy is bad. Too thin, too new. If you can see the current below, don't step on it. If it groans beneath your feet, back up, slowly. Try not to think about the stories, because of course there are stories. There always are. Travellers who went through the ice and disappeared. Children chasing sleds into thin spots. Whole carts pulled by oxen that cracked through and vanished in seconds, swallowed by the thawing mouth of a river that had been still and quiet just moments before. You saw one once. A man's foot went through a weak patch. He dropped to one knee, screamed. The ice held barely, but he crawled off with blood on his boot and a look on his face, like he'd just stared into death. After that, he never went near the river again, not even in summer. Scholars debate how often people really used frozen rivers for travel. Some say it was rare and dangerous. Others argue it was surprisingly common, especially in areas with trade routes that crossed wide waterways. For you, it's not a debate, it's an opportunity. If it saves you an hour of trudging through drifts with a half-frozen sack of oats on your back, then yes, you'll risk the ice. There's a freedom in it too. On foot, through snow, you're slow and hunched and constantly sinking. On the river you move, you glide. Even if it's awkward and painful, it feels better than slogging. You almost forget your boots have holes. Almost. One quirky fact you learn from the old men near the forge: some say the river remembers who's crossed it. That if someone dies on the ice, their ghost stays beneath, knocking once for every footstep taken above. You listen for knocks when you walk, half out of fear, half out of curiosity. You never hear any. You're not sure if that's good or bad. Sometimes you just stand in the middle, no sled, no chores, and stare up at the sky. The grey is endless, but on rare days, the clouds part and show a hint of blue. A hint, that's all. And it's enough to make your chest ache a little with the memory of summer. You wonder how long the ice will last. No one really knows. It depends on the weather, which changes like moods. Some years the freeze lasts deep into March. Other years it thaws in February and makes travel impossible again. So you use it while you can. Like everything else in winter, it's borrowed time. Eventually the thaw will come. And with it, the danger, because melting ice doesn't warn you. One day it's solid, the next it looks solid but has turned to slush just beneath the surface. That's when people go missing. That's when the river takes things back. So you mark the days, you listen for the groan, you step lightly, and you keep your eyes on the bank. But until then, you walk the frozen river like it's a secret road, one carved by the cold, lined with risk, and whispered through by wind. It's the only time winter lets you move faster than fear. There's a phrase that floats around the village, low and grim, passed from frost-bitten lips like a curse no one dares name too loud. The lean months. No one has to explain what it means. You feel it in your belly, in the weight of your coat, in the empty corners of your pantry. It starts creeping in just after Candlemas, when the days are still cold but the calendar pretends spring is close. February rolls in like a thin stray dog, hungry and mean, and March kicks you while you're down. By now, most of your food is gone. Not running low, gone. The roots have shriveled, the jars are empty. You've stretched every dried bean and crust of bread as far as it can go. The grain you once scooped freely is now measured out in trembling handfuls. You find yourself bargaining with yourself. If I eat half hour and half tomorrow, maybe I'll have enough left for next week. But you're not sure what enough even means anymore. Hunger isn't just in your stomach now, it's in your thoughts. You think about food constantly, not big feasts, not dreams of roast meat or overflowing platters. You fantasize about a warm turnip, a thick slice of bread, a boiled egg, something simple, something real. You chew on memories and the cravings get weird. You'd give anything for something crunchy. Everything is soft now. Gruel, stew, mash. Your teeth feel forgotten. You consider chewing on bark. You remember an old story about boiling belts? Leather soup. It sounded ridiculous once. Now you wonder what kind of belt makes the best broth. Historically, these late winter months were the hardest across medieval Europe. Spring planting hadn't yet begun, and the previous year's stores had already been scraped down to dust. In good years, villages rationed carefully. In bad years, people starved. quietly, slowly. No drama, just a long thinning out. Your neighbours are quieter now. Less laughter, less yelling, even the chickens seem subdued. Everyone walks with a kind of hollow stillness, the kind of movement that says, I'd rather not, but I have to. You see the children picking at frostbitten moss, poking the snow for anything green. You catch yourself watching them and wondering if they'll be the ones who don't make it. You immediately hate the thought, but it doesn't leave. The fire burns lower these days too. The woodpile is a sad little stump of sticks and regrets. You make choices now, warmth or food, heat or light. If you're lucky, you find a dead branch fallen from a tree. If you're not, you burn furniture. Or bits of fencing. You hear someone burned a wooden spoon last week. You've burned worse. One fringe belief says that hunger in late winter isn't just physical. It's a kind of punishment, a purging of the soul through the body. Suffering before spring to make the land more fertile. You don't buy it, but you also don't have the energy to argue. You try distraction. You carve things badly. You mend clothing, even if it doesn't need it. You hum songs your grandmother sang. You tell stories to your siblings, changing the endings to something softer than reality. It works, a little, but not enough to stop the gnawing. Sometimes you find scraps, forgotten ends of dried fruit, a sliver of old cheese, a wrinkled apple half frozen in the bottom of the cellar. You eat them like treasures, slowly, reverently. You chew as if time itself can stretch the flavour. And then there's foraging, a cruel joke in this season. The snow is melting in patches, revealing cold, dead earth. You dig through it anyway, hoping for wild garlic, nettles, bitter greens, anything that hasn't been claimed by winter. One day you find a few sad mushrooms. You bring them home, giddy. They taste like damp wood and revenge, but you eat them with joy. A scholarly debate persists about whether communities truly starved every year, or whether we overstate the suffering. But you don't care about the argument. You care that your cousin fainted while fetching water, that the old man down the lane hasn't been seen in days, that your own fingers tremble more than usual. Debate all you want. You're hungry. Even the animals look thinner. The dog's ribs show, the chicken's combs have faded. One goat in the next field keeled over during the night. Its breath rising one last time in a silver puff. The family butchered it before breakfast. They shared a little of the meat. You didn't ask for any, but you thought about it, all day. And when someone does share a meal with you, a bowl of soup and a chunk of a root, it feels like a miracle. Not just the food, but the gesture. Kindness tastes better than salt. You make tea out of whatever you can boil. Herbs, bark, old spices, dried berries. Anything to trick your stomach into thinking it's getting something substantial. You hold the warm mug to your chest and pretend it's a meal. It works, sometimes. You even say mmm out loud like a madman. Nights are the worst. Hunger sharpens in the dark. Your stomach growls like an animal. You try not to wake anyone. You shift, turn, curl into yourself. You dream of food, not banquets, but scraps. One night you dream of a single plum, perfectly ripe, dripping juice down your chin. You wake up chewing your blanket. There's no room for pride now. You dig through ash piles for dropped food. You boil bones a second time, a third. You soak bread until it swells, trying to make it feel like more. You eat things you wouldn't have touched a month ago. You stop asking what's in the stew, and yet you survive, just barely. You wake up each morning with a dry mouth and a tighter belt, but you wake. That's more than some. You start to believe that maybe, just maybe, you'll see spring, that a sprout will crack the ground again, that you'll taste something green. But not today. Today is lean. Today is grey. Today is gnawing. And still you carry on. Then, when things are at their bleakest, when the air smells like mould and boiled root and your stomach feels like a shriveled walnut, something truly ridiculous happens. People throw a party. Midwinter festivities aren't about joy, not really. They're about defiance. It's like everyone collectively looks at the snow, the cold, the bare cupboards, and says, nope, we're not dying today. So you dress in your least horrible clothes, wipe the soot off your face and trudge toward the village square with your ribs poking your tunic from the inside. It's not grand. Don't imagine fireworks or feasts. It's patchy and cold and half-muttered, but it's something. Someone has dragged out a little ale from their stores. Someone else has an old drum that thumps out a rhythm so slow it barely qualifies as music. There's dancing, if you can call it that. More of a swaying, hunched sort of movement. Like everyone's knees are on strike, but their souls remembered the steps. You're not even sure which festival this is. Candlemas, some saint's day, a pre-Christian ritual the elders refuse to explain, doesn't matter. What matters is there's a fire in the middle of the square and people are standing around it smiling, teeth chattering and eyes brighter than you've seen in weeks. Historically, this wasn't unusual, even during the hardest parts of winter. Medieval communities found ways to mark time with celebration. It was less about excess and more about resistance. A way to remind yourself that you're still human, not just a walking stomach wrapped in layers of scratchy wool. Someone tells a story, old winding, with a lot of unnecessary side characters and a goat who probably symbolises something. You laugh anyway, because laughter warms you in a way the fire can't. You drink a mug of ale that tastes like warm vinegar. You pretend it's wine. You pretend you're full. There's food, of course, not a feast, but a few hoarded treats that somehow survived into the lean months. Someone passes around dried fruit. Another person brings out a precious lump of hard cheese, which is sliced so thin it's nearly transparent. You get a bit of oat cake that tastes mostly of smoke and memories, but still, you eat it like it's gold. One of the older women, bent like a shepherd's crook and twice as sharp, starts singing. A low, wordless chant. Others join in. It builds slowly, layer by layer, until the whole group is humming the same tune. You don't know the words. Maybe there aren't any. Maybe it's just the sound you make when the fire is warm and your feet are cold and your heart wants to remind itself it still exists. A fringe tradition you remember from your childhood creeps into the mix. Something about tossing grain into the fire to bless the coming harvest. Someone does it, scattering a precious handful of oats into the flames. The fire crackles, sparks fly. For a second, everyone's eyes reflect firelight and hope. Then it's gone, but the silence afterward feels holy. There's a debate among historians about just how pagan these midwinter customs were. Were people secretly keeping the old ways alive under a thin Christian coat of whitewash? Or were they genuinely reformed, just adding some local flair to the church calendar? You don't know. You just know that standing in the cold surrounded by people who shouldn't have anything left to give, but give anyway, is its own kind of religion. The children somehow still have energy. They chase each other around the fire until one of them wipes out spectacularly on the ice, and everyone laughs. There's no malice in it, just that relieved human sound that says, "We're still here." You join in, if only because it's the first real sound you've made in days. Eventually someone passes around a pipe. It's filled with something harsh and herbal, probably sage or dried mugwort. You take a pull, you cough so hard your ribs ache, but for a moment, your head feels lighter. You look up and realise you haven't looked at the stars in weeks. They're brighter than you remember. Or maybe you're just more desperate for light. Later, someone brings out a mask. It's crude, made from old leather and bits of bone, with a twisted grin carved into the surface. They dance in it, slow, deliberate steps, like they're channeling something older than words. The children shriek. The adults chuckle nervously. You feel a shiver that has nothing to do with the wind. Some part of you wonders how many centuries this has been happening exactly like this. One peculiar thing, you see people giving away food. Not hoarding, not trading, but giving. A crust here, a spoonful there. There's something about the shared suffering of winter that makes people softer. Not always, not consistently, but in these moments, generosity survives. You give up your last sliver of dried apple to a little girl with sunken eyes. Her smile is more filling than the apple would have been. There's an awkward attempt at a game. Some kind of stick and stone tossing contest that loses momentum halfway through, but no one cares. It's not about winning, it's about doing. About moving your body, making noise, feeling human. Eventually the fire starts to fade, the drums slow, people drift off one by one back to their cold beds and smoky huts. But they walk straighter. Their steps seem firmer. It's not that the hunger is gone, it's not that the cold gave up. It's just that for a little while they remembered they're more than just survivors. You linger a little longer, watching the last sparks float into the night. You pull your cloak tighter, but your chest feels warm. Not from the fire, from the people, from the reminder that suffering doesn't always mean silence. Sometimes it means singing anyway. You walk home with your breath curling ahead of you like a trail of ghosts, but they're not haunting you tonight. Tonight, they're dancing. It happens quietly, the way most danger does in winter. One morning you wake up and something's off. It's not colder, not exactly, but the air feels different. Stiller, like the village is holding its breath. You step outside and the snow crunches underfoot just like always. But when you glance toward the storage shed, You see the door hanging slightly open. That's not normal, not your normal, and definitely not accidental. At first, you try to convince yourself it was the wind, but you latched that door, you remember latching it. So unless the wind has learned how to untie rope and lift a wooden bar, you know what this means. Someone's been here. Someone's been stealing. You're not alone in this discovery. That same day, 3 other families say their stores were tampered with. A bag of beans here, a wheel of cheese there. Nothing massive, but enough to matter. Enough to make people start locking doors and sleeping with knives within reach. The idea of theft in a village this small is both unthinkable and inevitable. Everyone knows everyone. You grow up together, survive storms and births and sicknesses in the same tight circle. But the longer winter drags on, the more desperate people become. Hunger doesn't care about history, and snow has a way of covering tracks, literally and figuratively. Night watch becomes a thing, not official, not organised, just something that begins to happen. One man stays up late and sitting near the window with a club across his knees. Another paces outside with his dog, pretending he's out to smoke. You take your turn too, not because you think you're intimidating, but because if you don't, your food might be gone by morning. And what then? There's no street lighting. The moon is your flashlighted, if it bothers to show up. Otherwise, you squint into blackness, straining your ears for the soft crunch of boots or the creak of a door. Every sound becomes suspicious. An owl makes your heart jump. A gust of wind has you clutching your coat like armour. You thought the cold was the enemy, or sickness, or hunger, but now there's something else, fear of each other. You start to look at your neighbours differently. That quiet boy 2 houses down, he's been walking a lot lately. The older woman with the limp, she seemed a little too cheerful yesterday. You catch yourself thinking these things and immediately hate yourself, but you don't stop. Historically, theft during the lean months wasn't just common, it was expected. Winter survival had very few rules, and desperation rewrites the ones that do exist. People stole firewood, livestock, bread, even clothing. It was a kind of local plague, silent, contagious, and always spreading. And the punishments? Brutal depending on where you lived. Fingers chopped off, ears notched, branding, public shaming. In some places, banishment. In others, the justice was private and swift, an accident in the forest, a fall down an icy hill. You hear stories about both. You believe all of them. In your village, though, things are quieter. No one talks openly about what's happening. But suddenly everyone's doors are barred. Everyone's walking in pairs. And if someone gets sick or weak, you notice how quickly people start whispering, not just in pity, but in suspicion. One fringe belief that circles this time of year is the snow thief. Not a person, but a spirit. A pale shape said to wander the village at night, lifting food from houses where gratitude has run dry. If you're selfish, if you hoard, if you eat without sharing, snow thief comes, takes what you don't deserve. You've even heard of people leaving out offerings, a crust of bread, a slice of dried pear, something for the shadow that takes without a sound. You've never seen it, but you've left something out once, just in case. It's not just food people steal, sometimes it's heat. A stolen log, a handful of dried peat. One night someone takes the bucket of coals you left by the door to restart the morning fire. You wake up to a dead hearth and a room so cold your breath hangs in the air like silk. You spend an hour relighting it. Your hands shake all day. You don't say a word. You've taken to hiding things. A sack of grain under the floorboards, a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth and tucked into a hollow behind the hearth. Not because you're selfish and not because you don't care, but because you're afraid. Because when everyone's starving, kindness starts to look like weakness. And yet, not everyone gives in to fear. You notice the baker sharing bread with a neighbour whose supplies were stolen. You see 2 boys dragging firewood from the forest and leaving small bundles on every doorstep. No one says anything about it, but the gesture speaks louder than any sermon. One evening, the blacksmith calls a meeting. People gather near the forge, stamping their feet, rubbing their hands together. He speaks bluntly, says the theft has to stop, says anyone caught will face the full weight of the village. But he also says this: we're not animals, not yet. We don't eat our own. You nod along with everyone else, but in your heart you wonder, because the line between our own and someone else gets blurry when you haven't eaten in 2 days, when your fingers are numb, when your kid is crying because there's no broth left. That night, you take your turn on watch. You sit by the window, eyes stinging with smoke and exhaustion, knife across your lap. The moon is out, the snow glows faintly. It's quiet, too quiet. You try to stay alert, but your thoughts drift. You think about what you'd do if you caught someone. Really caught them. Would you yell? Would you fight? Would you forgive? You never find out. The night passes without a sound, but the next morning you find footprints, too small to be yours, leading to your doors. Then away again, and your hidden cheese is gone. You can hear the forge long before you see it. Even in winter, especially in winter, the rhythmic pounding of metal on metal cuts through the stillness like a heartbeat, steady, loud, reassuring. The sound carries across the frozen fields, through the brittle trees, through the muffled snow. In a village where most things are frozen, broken, or on the edge of collapse, the blacksmith's forge is somehow always alive. It's strange, isn't it? That in a season where even the chickens look ready to give up, there's still a place in the village that crackles with heat and purpose. You find yourself drawn to it, like everyone else. You make up excuses to stop by. A knife needs sharpening, a hinge is loose, your cousin's axe handle cracked. Anything to step into that world of flame and hammer and smoke. The forge sits at the edge of the village, nestled against a low stone wall that's blackened with years of soot. The roof is thick thatch, layered so deep the snow doesn't stand a chance. Steam constantly billows from the chimney. Inside it's warm, real warm, not just not freezing, but warm enough to sweat. The first time you visited in late January, you thought you died and been sent to a smoky, hammer-filled heaven. The blacksmith is half myth, half man, broad-shouldered, burn-scarred, forearms like tree trunks. He barely speaks, just grunts in acknowledgement and points with glowing tongs. But his work is flawless. Hooks, nails, blades, horseshoes, he shapes them all with an ease that borders on witchcraft. You've seen him pull glowing iron from the fire and hammer it like it owed him money, the sparks lighting his face in flashes like a storm trapped indoors. And in winter, his forge becomes more than a workplace. It becomes a refuge. It's not official, of course. There's no sign, no invitation. But everyone knows, if your fingers are too cold to bend, if your spirits are cracked like your boots, if you just need to feel something besides the ache of being alive in the middle of February, you go to the forge. He lets you stay, doesn't say much, just nods toward a bench near the wall, away from the sparks. Someone's always there, an old man wheezing into his scarf, a young mother with red fingers wrapped around a clay mug, a boy dozing with his back against the stones. You sit, hold your hands out to the heat, and feel the cold start to lift, slowly, stubbornly. One historical fact. The blacksmith wasn't just a tradesman in medieval life. He was vital, essential. Metal tools weren't just conveniences, they were survival. The forge was where agriculture and weaponry and household function all intersected. Without him, your ploughs rust, your doors break, your knives dull. He's not just a worker, he's the beating heart of the village. But in winter, his value goes beyond the practical. His forge radiates life. You can feel it in your bones. The warmth seeps into your skin like a second soul. It's addictive. You linger longer than necessary, pretending to admire his work when really you're just enjoying not being miserable. There's a fringe belief, mostly among children, but whispered by adults after too much ale, that the blacksmith makes deals with fire spirits. That's why his forge never goes cold, why his tools don't break, why he doesn't seem to mind the heat. You asked him once, half joking, and he just smiled. That's when you knew it might actually be true. And it's not just the fire that makes this place magic, it's the sound. The hammer on iron, the hiss of steam when metal hits water, the crackle of flames. After days of quiet suffering, those noises feel like proof that the world is still turning, that creation still exists, even if everything else feels like it's falling apart. People bring him gifts, a bottle of small beer, a pouch of dried herbs, a loaf of bread if they can spare it. No one asks for payment. It's respect, gratitude, insurance maybe. You want to be in the blacksmith's good graces, especially in winter, because when your door latch snaps, or your axe head comes loose, or you finally muster the strength to hunt something and realize your knife is dull as snow, he's the one who can fix it. Scholars sometimes overlook the social role of the blacksmith, focusing more on the economic output. But if you live here, among the smoke and the snow and the hunger, you know better. The forge isn't just a place, it's a presence. You walk into that space and feel yourself settle, like your soul has finally stepped out of the cold. You learn things sitting on that bench. Who's sick? Who got caught stealing? who found a dead rabbit in their trap and cried from joy. The blacksmith says little, but he hears everything. People talk more freely around the fire. They open up like ice cracking in spring. It's not confession, it's survival. One day you bring in a broken hook. Small, not urgent, but you need an excuse to warm up. He takes it, inspects it, and tosses it into the fire without a word. You sit, you wait, and then, out of nowhere, he offers you a cup of broth. Hot, salty, you nearly cry. You sip in silence, the fire roaring nearby, the hammer falling in steady rhythm. And for a moment you feel okay. Not good, not full, not even warm all the way through, but okay, like maybe you'll make it. Like maybe, even if winter wins the battle, it won't win the war. When you leave, your skin smells like ash and iron. Your hair feels dry from the heat, but your fingers move again. Your breath doesn't fog so thick. You tuck your scarf tighter, nod to the blacksmith, and step back into the snow. The cold hits you immediately, but it doesn't bite quite as deep. Not today. There comes a point in the winter where you stop waiting for spring and start accepting that this frozen limbo might be permanent. The roads are still ice, the wind still punches you in the face every time you open the door, and the sky hasn't shown a real sunbeam in days. You're tired. Everyone's tired. But that's exactly when the idle hands start itching. You'd think there wouldn't be energy left for anything beyond basic survival, but somehow there is. And if people don't keep busy, they start to go a little strange. You've seen it happen. The kind of strange where someone spends 3 straight days cleaning the same wooden spoon, or starts naming their potatoes. So instead, you find something to do, something that doesn't involve weeping gently into your stew. Winter work becomes its own sort of lifeline, the kind that doesn't feed your stomach but keeps your mind from curling up and giving up entirely. You start with mending, clothes mostly. There's always something coming apart. A torn sleeve, a split seam, a hole in your sock the size of your dignity. You sit near the hearth, fingers stiff, pushing needle through thread like you're sewing your sanity back together. Everyone works on something. The older women spin wool, their hands moving so fast it's hypnotic. One spins with her eyes closed, muttering what you assume are prayers, or possibly threats. Children make little woven toys out of straw, not for fun, but because they'll be traded later. Every object is currency when winter stretches too long. You pick up carving again, not because you're good at it, but because it fills the hours. Your first project is a spoon. It turns out horribly, more like a scoop or a sad hollowed twig. But you keep at it. You shave slivers of wood by firelight, slowly shaping something that, if you squint, resembles usefulness. Historically, this was normal. Winter was the season for domestic labour, the kind of slow, quiet work no one had time for during planting, harvesting or herding. It was the time for spinning, weaving, repairing tools, patching leather, boiling glue, fixing sleds, fletching arrows. Not because it was fun, but because once the weather turned, you couldn't not do these things. A broken plough in May is a disaster. A broken plough in February is just a project. You learn to make candles, bad ones. Greasy little rushlights that burn too fast and sputter with satisitude. But they work. You dip reeds into the tallow again and again until they thicken, then set them in a crooked row along the wall. You feel strangely proud. You, a peasant with no money and one usable sock, have made light. It's the closest you'll get to magic. One fringe superstition that pops up around this time of year: never work on the 7th day of the 7th week of winter. Supposedly it curses whatever you make. You don't even know which week this is, honestly. Time has stopped being real, but when that day comes around, if it comes, you plan to take a nap just to be safe. Tool maintenance becomes oddly satisfying. You sharpen your knife on a whetstone until it gleams, you polish the handle of your axe, you oil a rusty hinge until it moves without groaning. These are small victories, but in winter, small victories are everything. A working knife means food. A working hinge means security. A sharp axe means one less hour out in the forest screaming at frozen wood. Some people start weaving baskets, others knit. One neighbour you never expected anything from, old, silent, always vaguely damp, suddenly produces a flute made of bone. Where did she learn to do that? No one asks. She just plays it softly by the fire at night and no one dares interrupt. It's haunting, beautiful, sad at moments. You lie awake later with the sound of it still lingering in your ears like fog. You trade what you make. If you can, your badly carved spoon gets swapped for a scrap of dried pork. Someone else trades mended mittens for 2 turnips. Barter becomes art. You learn to talk up your work. You call it unique instead of crooked, rustic instead of lumpy. You've never been more persuasive. Scholars often overlook the role of this kind of labour in peasant life, especially during winter. They focus on agriculture, war, plague, but in truth these quiet acts of mending, shaping, to preserving are what kept people moving forward. It wasn't all drama and disaster. Sometimes it was just 2 hands and a threadbare cloak and the stubborn will to make it last another year. You start teaching your little brother how to sew. He grumbles, complains, stabs himself twice with the needle, but by the end of the week he's patching his own trousers. You don't say anything, but the look you give him across the fire is practically a medal of honour. He grins. First time you've seen him smile in a month. Some days the work distracts you from the hunger. Other days it just reminds you of it. You'll be stitching a sleeve and suddenly your hands go weak. You realise you haven't eaten since morning, or maybe yesterday. You drink water, you push through, you finish the sleeve. Then you sit back, stare into the fire and tell yourself it was worth it. One day you find a broken comb and spend an hour carving a new tooth into it. It's pointless. No one's hair has been combed properly in weeks, but you do it anyway. There's something soothing about it, making something better even if no one notices. Eventually your fingers toughen. The cramps in your hands stop, you get faster. Your work starts to look, dare you say it, decent. Not beautiful, not skilled, but decent. Usable. You think maybe when winter ends you might still carve. Not out of necessity, but because you like it. At night you lie under your thin blanket, listening to the wind screech through the trees, and you picture all the little things you made that day. A repaired seam, a patched shoe, a half-finished bowl, proof that you did something, proof that the day wasn't wasted. And when morning comes, and your hands ache, and the fire's out again, and the cold slaps your face like a tax collector, well, at least you know you'll have something to do. You wake one morning after a longer than usual sleep, the fire down to embers. Your breath rising in little wisps like a ghost above your face. It's dark still, of course, but something feels different. You're not quite sure what it is, only that your body feels heavier than usual, like you've slept through something important. Your joints ache, but not from movement, from stillness, deep stillness. You sit up slowly, surprised by how hard it is to get your arms to cooperate. Everyone else is still asleep. Your brother curled up under 2 threadbare blankets. Your mother slumped in her chair by the hearth, head resting on her chest, mouth slightly open. The dog hasn't even stirred. And now that you're thinking about it, none of you really remember going to bed. You just slipped into the dark altogether and stayed there. For a long time. It's not just today. It's been happening slowly. Sleeps are stretching longer, deeper. Mornings where no one moves until the sun is higher. Days where the fire gets ignored for an hour too long because no one can summon the will to get up and stoke it. You'd assumed it was fatigue or cold or hunger. Maybe it is, or maybe it's something else. Because here's the thing, you've heard stories, quiet ones, half whispers from the older folks, about how people used to hibernate. Not like bears, not quite. Not full cave and sleep until spring hibernation, but something gentler, something slower. A medieval sort of wintering. A time when, during the hardest months, January, February into March, families would sleep more, move less, live in a kind of twilight pause. They'd eat once a day, rest more than they worked, fade into a rhythm that matched the sun's refusal to rise. And now, lying there, blinking into the low light, it makes a strange kind of sense. There's actually a scholarly debate about it. Some historians point to monastic records and old peasant calendars that show an odd dip in winter activity. Fewer tasks, shorter days, notes about longer resting periods. Others argue it's nonsense, that survival took constant effort, and people didn't have the luxury to doze through winter like hedgehogs. But here, in your tiny soot-blackened hut, it feels less like a theory and more like a bodily truth. You're sleeping more, not because you want to, because you have to. Your body is retreating from the season, conserving itself. You eat your one small meal in the afternoon, stew or gruel or whatever can be made from the dregs of your pantry, and then you rest. Your days are slow. You don't talk much. You mend quietly or sit or stare at the fire until your thoughts dissolve into smoke. And when the fire dies, you do too, for a while. Not literally, but close. There's no shame in it. In fact, there's a kind of peace. When you stop fighting winter, When you accept that this season is not just a passage of time, but a state, you start to soften. You stop demanding more from yourself than what's possible. You give in to the stillness, to the slowing down. Of course, you can't completely hibernate. Someone has to fetch water, someone has to feed the chickens, someone has to stoke the fire so your breath doesn't freeze inside your lungs. But it's less than before. Everything is less. Movement, hunger, urgency. The world shrinks to the size of a single room and a single rhythm. Wake, warm, eat, sleep, and you keep track of the days with little scratches on a board near the hearth. At some point, you stop caring which day it is. Yes. You just care that the scratches are still increasing. That time is still moving, that the dark hasn't eaten everything. There's a fringe belief among the mountain folk that winter is not a season, but a srit. An ancient, slow-moving god who creeps through the land, draping everything in silence. And the only way to survive it is to match its pace, to be still, to be quiet, to not anger it with too much noise or ambition. Some people whisper their apologies to the cold before bed. You've done it, once or twice. You haven't told anyone. Your dreams are different now, too. Deeper, stranger. Long stretches of nothing, interrupted by vivid images of warmth, sun on grass, apples on trees, bare feet in the mud. You dream of green, of light, of things you haven't seen in months. You wake up crying one morning because in your dream, you ate a warm plum and felt its juice on your tongue. The line between sleeping and waking gets blurry, you forget what day it is. You ask your sister something and then realise she's been asleep for hours. You blink, and an hour passes. You blink again, and it's night. Time becomes soft, elastic, unreliable, but you adapt, because that's what humans do. You make new rituals, a slow morning stretch before the fire, a single candle lit after the sun goes down. You recite the same old poem every night before bed, not because you like it, but because it tells your mind that it's time to slip away. Some nights you think about animals, about how they dig into burrows, curl up in dens, let the cold pass over them like a wave, how they trust the dark, how they understand something you're just starting to grasp, that not every season is for movement. Some are for stillness. You try to pass this wisdom on. You tell your little brother it's okay to sleep longer. You tell your mother not to worry if she doesn't feel like working all day. You say things like, "This is what winter wants," as if that explains anything. Somehow it does. You start sleeping twice a night, once in the early evening and again after a few midnight hours of wakefulness. During that middle time, you sit by the fire, sip hot water, whisper stories to whoever's half awake. It's quiet, intimate, dreamlike. You think maybe this is how people were always meant to live in winter, half asleep, half awake, always floating. Eventually you doze again. You let the dark take you, not out of fear but acceptance. Winter hasn't killed you, it's just slowed you down. And maybe that's the point. You start measuring your days by firewood. Not meals, not sunlight, not prayers, just how many logs you've got left stacked against the wall and how fast they're disappearing. You count them in the morning. Again in the afternoon. Once more before bed. It becomes a compulsion. You run your fingers over the bark, feel how damp it is, how crumbly. You sniff it to see if it's worth burning. You start dreaming about woodpiles the way merchants dream about gold. Because now, in the final stretch of winter, fuel is more precious than fuel and food. There's something brutal about it. Almost ironic. You live in a landscape full of trees, forests thick with branches and bark and roots, and yet you're running out of the one thing that makes life even remotely tolerable. You can't just go out and grab more either. Everything out there is wet or frozen or still part of something large enough to fight back. Cutting green wood is pointless. It smokes, sputters and spits like it's mad at you. It smells awful, it burns fast, and it leaves you colder than when you started. So what do? You ration first. 1 log in the morning, 2 at night, maybe a few scraps of kindling if you're feeling fancy. You get used to a chill in the air, used to your breath fogging indoors, used to seeing your own shadow flicker by the fire while your toes numb beneath the blanket. The fire's not for comfort anymore, it's strategy. Historically, firewood shortages were one of the biggest winter threats in medieval life. Everyone thinks about food, disease, wolves, but fuel? That's the slow killer. Without it, you can't cook, you can't dry your clothes, you can't stay warm enough to move, think, or survive the night without curling into a shivering ball of regret. You watch families get desperate. You hear of people burning furniture, breaking down carts, dismantling fences. Anything wood becomes potential fuel. You pass a house with a door missing and you don't even ask. You already know the answer. Warmth was worth more than privacy. One fringe belief says that every piece of wood carries a spirit, and if you burn it for greed instead of need, you invite the wrong kind of attention. You're supposed to thank the wood aloud before setting it in the fire. You tried it once, half joking, and then burned your hand within minutes. You thank the logs now, every time, just in case. You've seen someone burn peat dug from the edge of the marsh last autumn. It's heavy, crumbly, and smells like wet death when it burns. But it burns. You'd trade 2 eggs for a block of it if you had eggs. One neighbour uses dried cow dung. Another uses straw bundles wrapped so tightly they smoulder for hours. There's no pride left in what fuels the fire, only need. And then there are the feuds. Quiet ones, cold ones. A log goes missing from someone's stack and suddenly you've got accusations whispered like curses. You see someone dragging a branch back from the forest and 4 people suddenly remember that tree being on their property. You're not just guarding food now, you're guarding flame. You guard yours carefully. You keep your small pile indoors now next to your sleeping mat. You check it obsessively. If a piece looks suspiciously smaller than it did the day before, you notice. You don't say anything, but you notice. Some nights you lie awake listening to the fire sputter and wonder if it will last until morning. You stare at the ceiling and do the math in your head. If you burn just 1 log tomorrow, and maybe skip the midday flame, and maybe wear every article of clothing you own all at once, maybe you can make it to March. But then the wind howls and the walls creak and your breath clouds in front of your nose and you reach for another log with shaking fingers. Because survival isn't tidy. It's not noble. It's messy, illogical, full of compromises. You know you should ration better. But you also know that if you don't get warm tonight, there might not be a tomorrow. One afternoon you venture into the forest again. Not far, just enough to look. You take a small hatchet, a rope and a prayer. The snow is knee-deep, and your boots are already soaked by the time you reach the tree line. You find fallen limbs, mostly. Old, dead branches. You drag them back in bundles tied to your waist like a sled dog, your breath coming in painful clouds. It takes hours, but when you finally get back, red-faced and raw-knuckled, you dump the wood by your door like a trophy. It's not much, but it's yours. You sit by the fire and hold your hands above it with a sense of earned victory. A small debate brews in the village about who should be responsible for shared fuel. Some say the church should collect and redistribute. Others think families should fend for themselves. The blacksmith tries to organise a system, but no one agrees. Too many empty hands, too many watchful eyes. In the end, it's like always, everyone quietly doing whatever they must to make it through. One morning, you find the fire out. Completely. Not even embers. You panic, not loud but deep. You try to relight it with damp kindling and weak fingers, the flint slipping in your hand. It takes 6 tries before you get a spark. When it finally catches, you feel like weeping. Not from joy, from relief, from the edge you almost stepped off. That night you dream of a great bonfire. Towering flames. Sparks reaching for the stars. You stand barefoot in the heat, laughing. Your whole family there, cheeks red, teary, eyes shining. You wake up smiling until the cold hits, until you remember you're down to 5 logs. 5 logs. You say it aloud just to hear the truth of it. 5 logs between now and spring, so you count them. Again, you touch each one, memorizing their shape, their size, the sound they make when you knock them together. They are time itself now, 5 days or 5 nights, or maybe less if the wind turns cruel again. You go to sleep wrapped in every cloth you own, one arm resting over the pile like a guard dog. Let the wolves come, let the sickness knock. You'll share your bread, but the fire stays. You wake up to a sound that doesn't belong. A dull, wet thud, then another. And then, unmistakably, the slow groan of a wooden door being forced open. You jolt upright, heart pounding, hands fumbling for your knife, but it's not an intruder. It's snow, deep snow, slumping off the roof in heavy, angry sheets. It's piled so high outside that when you finally push the door open, it barely clears a foot of space. You're snowed in. Not metaphorically, literally. The entire world is buried. The drifts are up to your waist, higher near the walls. Paths you cleared last week are completely gone, swallowed by white. The garden, the woodpile, the coop all vanished. There's no landscape anymore, just soft, brutal mounds where the world used to be. It's beautiful, yes, but in the same way a storm at sea is beautiful when you're clinging to a piece of driftwood. You grab a shovel, or, well, a shovel-shaped thing. It's a worn wooden board tied to a stick with rawhide and hope. It flexes when you scoop. You flex when you scoop. Within 5 minutes, you're sweating through your second layer of wool and swearing under your breath like the snow personally wronged you. Everyone in the village is outside, bent over, shoveling, scraping, hacking at the snow with whatever's sharp enough to cut and dull enough not to snap. No one's talking, there's no energy for it, just the scraping of wood on ice and the occasional yell when someone finds a door, a chicken, or worse. Nothing at all is where something should be. Snow doesn't just cover things, it steals them. Fences collapse under the weight. Roofs cave in. One family loses an entire storage shed. It just vanishes, flattened into like a cake in a bad oven. You help dig it out, or hands burning from the cold, sweat freezing to your eyebrows. The wind picks up halfway through the day and begins shoving the snow right back where it came from. You pause, look at the swirling white in the air, and consider giving up, just sitting down and letting the snow decide your fate. But you don't. Because as exhausting as it is, you've got to get to the coop. You need eggs, or at least the illusion of eggs. The chickens are alive, barely, huddled together like one sad, shivering organism. You grab the few that still look alert and carry them inside, ignoring the smell. Everyone smells, including you. Dignity froze off back in December. You scatter grain, whisper an apology to the rest, and return to shoveling. One historical fact. While snow itself wasn't always seen as a lethal threat, deep drifts in medieval Europe caused real lasting problems, structural collapses, livestock losses, isolation. Entire villages were sometimes cut off for days. There are accounts of people tunneling out like moles, hacking through doorways just to reach their neighbours. And speaking of tunnels, you help dig one. Not a deep one, but a narrow trench between your home and the neighbours. You pass buckets of packed snow hand to hand, your arms shaking, your breath fogging so thick you can barely see. The path is more symbolic than practical, but it matters. Now if someone needs help, they don't have to claw their way there. There's an odd hush under deep snow. Sound gets swallowed. The world becomes muffled like it's sleeping. But under that quiet there's a constant pressure, as if the snow is leaning in, trying to crush your resolve. You keep moving. You have to. The stillness now is dangerous. One fringe belief floats to mind as you work. That when snow piles high enough to cover a man, the earth is trying to bury the living alongside the dead. Some call it the white wake. It's why older folks light extra candles on nights after heavy snowfall to show the earth they're not ready to go. You've never believed it, but tonight you light one anyway. And then there's the issue of roofs. You hear the creak first, then the crack, then the sudden whoomp as part of a neighbour's roof gives out, dumping snow into their loft like a rude guest. No one's hurt, but spirits are. You help patch it with boards and prayer. You spend the night brushing snow off your own roof every hour just to be told, your arms moving like wet laundry in the wind. You wonder aloud why snow doesn't fall evenly, why it chooses one house to bury and spares another. An older woman with missing teeth tells you snow is like people, unpredictable, heavy, and best dealt with in small pieces. You don't fully get it, but you nod. The next day the sun comes out. Not warm sun, but bright, blinding. The snow gleams like powdered glass. It hurts your eyes. You squint until they water, then cut slits in a strip of cloth and wear it across your face. Primitive sunglasses. You look ridiculous. But it helps. You start to see the world again, one mound at a time. The well is still there. The wood pile half sunken but visible. Even a patch of your neighbour's thatched roof poking through. You dig carefully around it, and as more emerges, you feel the strangest thing. Hope. Scholars have noted that snow in medieval life was more than weather. It was transformation. It erased boundaries, redrew maps, made lords and peasants equally small under its weight. It was cleansing and cruel at once, and when it finally began to melt, it left a world that was not quite the same. That night, you boil water over the fire, steam curling around your face, and you feel something you haven't in weeks. Tired, not just exhausted. It's different. There's an end to tired. Exhaustion is a pit. Tired is a bed. You drink something warm, wrap yourself in a blanket, and listen to the roof creak gently under its burden. The snow hasn't won. It tried. But you're still here. and tomorrow you'll dig again. You don't notice the change at first. It's so subtle, so cautious you almost dismiss it. A faint dripping sound from the eaves, like a child playing with a leaky bucket. The snow along the edge of the path looks slightly defeated. The wind doesn't hiss anymore. It hums. You blink at the horizon and realise the sky has shifted from its usual sheet of cold pewter to a colour you haven't seen in weeks. Blue, not a summer blue, not even a full stretch, just a thin sharp blade of it slicing through the clouds. Then you smell it. Wet dirt, not the rot of root cellars or the mould of damp clothes. Earth, real, honest, stubborn soil. The scent rises like a promise, sneaking up through the melting snow and slapping your senses awake. You stop mid-step and just breathe. It's the first hopeful smell in months, and you'd bottle it if you could. The thaw has begun, slowly, stupidly, one dripping icicle at a time. But it's happening, and nothing makes you feel more like a peasant in the medieval mud than realising how excited you are to see mud again. Brown, slick, disgusting mud. You stare at a puddle forming near the chicken coop like it's a religious vision. But it's not all good news. The thaw brings its own chaos. Snowmelt has no manners. It seeps into everything. Roofs start leaking in new places. The thatch, brittle from months of cold, sags under water weight. You spend half a morning chasing a drip from one corner of the ceiling to the other, setting pots, bowls, a cracked helmet, whatever you can find, to catch the plinking rhythm of spring's first assault. The ground, once frozen solid, turns to mush. Your boots sink. The paths disappear under a stew of slush and straw and animal droppings. The village square becomes a pond. Children splash in it until someone yells, and then they splash quieter. You go to the well and find the bucket sitting in water, finally free. It smells slightly green. You grin like a fool. You haul it up and drink. Cold but not freezing, just wet, to give a life-giving wet. Historically, this period, late winter, early spring, was among the most treacherous in the medieval year. The freeze might be over, but now came the floods, the collapses, the rot. Burials delayed by the frozen ground had to be rushed before the thaw turned them into morbid soup. You don't say that part aloud, but you think of the chapel yard and wonder how the gravediggers are doing. A fringe belief tied to the thaw is that it wakes up spirits, not the angry, vengeful kind, but the sad ones. The ones that died in winter, still waiting for a proper send-off. As the earth softens, they're said to drift out with the mist, walking slowly toward wherever they were meant to go. You leave the door open for a moment longer than usual that night, just in case one needs to pass through. The animals are confused. The chickens don't know whether to stay inside or start scratching. The goats refuse to step in the mud. The dog spends the whole day rolling in the wet straw, completely beside itself with joy. You look at it, tail wagging and tongue lolling, and feel something warm bloom in your chest. If the dog's celebrating, it must mean something. You go to the forest, not deep, just to the edge, and find branches snapping back to life. Nothing green yet, but there's a smell. Bark. Sap. Possibility. You brush your hand along a low-hanging branch and feel the first hint of give. The trees are still asleep, but they're dreaming now. You spot your first snowdrop. A tiny white flower, shaking in the breeze like it doesn't fully trust the season yet. It's barely taller than your thumb. You crouch, stare at it, and nearly forget to breathe. After weeks of white, brown and grey, it feels like colour has returned in miniature. You don't pick it. You just nod at it like an old friend you hadn't expected to see. Then comes the real flood. Snowmelt from the hills begins pouring through the village like it's running late. Tiny creeks swell into brown rivers. You watch a bucket float down the path and no one even bothers to chase it. You help dig a shallow trench to guide the water away from a neighbour's home. Your hands go numb. You keep digging anyway. Your home floods, a little. Not enough to drown, just enough to curse. The floor is a slick mess. You mop with a rag that smells like old cheese. You dump water out the door like you're trying to make the house lighter so it doesn't sink. You're constantly wet. Your sleeves, your knees, the bottoms of your tunic. Every layer of wool you own now has its own distinct soggy scent. You joke that if you ever dry out completely, you'll probably catch fire from friction alone. And still, it's better than before. You'll take slush over silence, mud over frostbite, drips over creeks. Because at least it feels like movement. At least it feels like the world is waking up, stretching, groaning, complaining, but moving. Some in the village are cautious, don't trust the first thaw, and they say, It'll trick you, and they're right. Snow falls again 2 days later. Not much, but enough to snap the illusions of early spring like a twig. The snowdrop wilts, the mud stiffens. You sigh, you drink hot water with stale herbs and pretend it tastes like patience. Scholars refer to this time as the false spring, a brief, glorious lie of warmth before winter returns for one last punch. You feel it in your bones, but you don't mind, not much, because now you know the end is coming. It may take weeks, but it's out there. You can smell it, so you patch the roof again. You drain the puddles from the barn, you dry your boots, poorly, and rest them by the fire. You hang your wet tunic on a stick. You step out into the grey morning and breathe deep. The snow isn't gone, but it's leaving. You can tell it's real this time, not the false spring from 2 weeks ago, the one that teased you with puddles and then slapped you with a surprise frost, but the true, slow, messy awakening that only a medieval March can bring. The mornings are still cold, sure. The mud still clings to your boots like a jealous lover. But there's birds now, real, squawking, flitting things, hopping between bare branches like they've got gossip to spread. And their song is awful. Sharp, desperate, half-frozen little shrieks. But to your ears, it's a full symphony. You're outside more, not because it's warm, let's not get crazy, but because the light lasts longer. An hour, maybe 2. You feel it in your spine first, then your legs. A tug toward the movement, after months of curling inward. Your body finally wants to stretch. You find yourself walking a little farther to fetch water, taking the long path around the village just to see things. Even if those things are mostly mud, sheep, and the same crooked fence post you've passed every day since birth. The fields are a swampy mess. Nothing grows yet, but the land smells alive again. That damp, grassy, manure-scented perfume of earth returning to itself. You stand in it, breathing deep, and suddenly understand every weird poem about spring your grandmother ever mumbled through toothless lips. And then, finally, comes the first day of digging. It's ceremonial almost. You and a few others go out to the frost-cracked fields with spades and saw joints and more stubbornness than sense. The soil is still heavy, clumped together like old bread dough. But you break it open anyway, you turn it. Lift it. Let the pale worms blink in confusion at the sky. You know nothing will grow yet, not for weeks, but it feels good just to start. Historically, this is when the medieval calendar starts to breathe again. Winter's long hold loosens, and every villager begins the slow shift back to motion. Ploughs are pulled from barns, oxen cursed a wick, seed sacks inspected for mould. The work returns. So do the blisters. Your body is weak from the long winter. You don't realise how much you've softened until you swing a hoe for 20 minutes and feel like your arms are falling off. You sit down on a rock and pretend you're just checking the soil, but really you're trying not to pass out. A neighbour laughs and hands you a chunk of dried apple. You eat it without chewing. Food is still tight. The stores are nearly gone, but now at least there's the idea of food. You start sprouting beans on the windowsill. You hang your last few onions in a sunnier spot, whispering encouragement to them like they are about to take an exam. You scrape out the bottom of a flour sack and mix it with old milk to make something vaguely like a pancake. You call it flatbread and pretend it's a delicacy. Your brother calls it crunch cloud. You ignore him. You help rebuild the chicken coop, which partially collapsed during the last storm. The chickens, what's left of them, are grateful, clucking with the tired tone of survivors. One even lays an egg. You don't eat it. You place it in a basket like it's a sacred relic, a symbol, a promise that real food is coming back. One fringe belief says that eating the first egg of spring without giving thanks guarantees a year of sour milk and broken tools. You don't know if that's true, but you say thank you anyway. To the chicken, to the dirt, to the sun, which finally doesn't look like it's judging you. The mud is endless. It gets into your boots, under your nails, between your teeth somehow. You try walking on the high edges of paths, but everyone else had the same idea, and now those are just slippery death slides. You fall 3 times in one day. The 3rd time you just stay down for a while and look up at the sky. It's clearer now, not always, not consistently, but sometimes. You lie there in the mud staring at a blue so pale it's almost white, and you feel a flicker of something close to happiness. Or maybe just relief. The sky is back, the world is back, you are back. There's talk of planting dates now, of when the barley can go in, of whether it's too soon for peas. You listen to the arguments like it's politics. Everyone has a different theory. The older ones say, wait. The younger ones say go. You dig your fingers into the soil and decide to trust your gut. The earth feels soft enough, hungry enough, you know how it feels. You find a few alder sprouting near the fence line, bittercress and nettles. You gather them carefully, boil them into a thin green soup and serve it like it's a feast. It tastes like grass and mistakes, but it tastes. You take a second bowl. One historical account mentions spring fevers, bouts of illness caused not by germs but by the body reawakening too quickly after the torpor of winter. You believe it. Everyone's twitchy, slightly manic, laughing too loudly, crying over small things. A man down the road weeps openly when his cow gives birth. You don't judge him, you'd cry too. You clean your house like it might be inspected by royalty. You throw open the windows, you beat the rugs, you burn old straw. It's not tidy work, but it's satisfying. You find a mummified carrot behind a chest and scream like it's a mouse. You name it Old Harold and toss it ceremonially into the compost heap. Scholars argue about when exactly string began in the medieval mind. Was it a date on the church calendar? The equinox? The first flower? The first working plough? You think it's this, now. This raw, muddy, emotional soup of a season. Nothing clear, nothing easy, but everything beginning. The thaw may have melted the snow, but spring melts you. You knew it was coming, everyone did. No one said it aloud, because in a medieval village, words have weight, and naming something invites it in. But you could feel it under your skin, like the way animals tense before a storm, like the way the air thickens before thunder. Something was off, too many people coughing, too many sore throats passed off as just the cold. And then one day the baker's boy doesn't open the shutters, and the next day someone mentions he hasn't been seen since Thursday. And by the end of the week the sickness has arrived. It's not dramatic, not at first, just a few sniffles that last too long, a few fevers that don't break though. Someone vomiting behind the chapel. The signs are so ordinary that they almost pass unnoticed, until they don't, until someone dies. You hear it first from your sister, who hears it from the midwife, who heard it from the blacksmith's wife. An old man, 3 doors down, found cold in bed. But not from winter. Not this time. From something hotter, redder, more terrifying. Historically, this was a common pattern. After the long dormancy of winter, illness surged in spring like weeds in a garden. The body, weakened by months of near starvation, poor hygiene and stale air, was ripe for infection. Spring didn't just bring flowers, it brought fever. And now it's brought it to your door. You try not to panic. You clean more. You air out every cloth, every blanket, every pot. You boil water obsessively. You scrape herbs from the bottom of a jar and mash them into a paste because someone said elderflower helped. Maybe it does, maybe it's just superstition. Either way, it gives you something to do with your hands. You avoid the sick at first. Everyone does. But in a village this small, avoidance has an expiration date. Someone's going to need help, and eventually it's someone you care about. Your neighbour's daughter comes down with it. Red cheeks, rattling breath, delirious murmurs about spring meadows that definitely aren't there. Her mother knocks on your door with wild eyes and dirt under her nails. She's been up all night. She needs help. You hesitate. Then you go. The girl is small and hot to the touch. Her hair sticks to her face in dark, wet strands. You sponge her forehead with water that used to be clean and now smells faintly of mint and desperation. You hold her hand while she shivers. You say her name over and over like an incantation. When she sleeps, you stay beside her just in case she wakes up scared or doesn't wake up at all. You return home that night reeking of sickness. You sit by the fire and don't speak. Your family doesn't ask. They just leave you a piece of bread and keep their distance. You've started hearing the bell. Once in the morning, once at dusk. The priest rings it for each death. Some days it rings once, other days 3, 4 times. You stop counting. You just feel it. Each chime like a weight dropped in your chest. A fringe belief says that sickness is the earth's way of balancing life after winter. Too many souls clinging on after the cold. Spring sweeps the excess. You don't like that thought. It feels cruel. But when the air is thick with fever sweat and old straw and fear, it's hard not to look for patterns in the pain. You start wearing a cloth over your mouth. It does nothing, probably, but it gives you control over something. You burn herbs in the hearth. You rub vinegar on the doorframe. Your aunt whispers a charm over the threshold. Every little action feels both absurd and vital. The scholars debate whether medieval folk really believed in contagion the way we do today. They didn't have germ theory, but they weren't stupid. They saw the patterns. When one person got sick, others followed. So they created space, distance, ritual. You're doing the same. You sleep farther from your brother now. You avoid gatherings, you hold your breath when you pass someone coughing. And yet life goes on. The fields still need turning. The animals still need feeding. You wear gloves now, not for warmth but for caution. You wipe your tools more than usual. You speak less, you listen more. You notice who's gone silent, who's stopped showing up. You help dig graves. It's awful work. Not because of the bodies, you're too numb to fear those, but because the earth, recently thawed, is sticky and clings to your spade like it's trying to keep what's buried. You curse it, then apologise, just in case the ground holds grudges. You hold a child once, just for a moment so his mother can sleep. He's burning up, his eyes are glassy. He grips your tunic with surprising strength. You sing to him, a lullaby your grandmother used to hum during thunderstorms. You don't know if he understands. You just don't want him to feel alone. One night, the sickness comes for your cousin. You sit by his bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest like it's your only job. You make him drink broth, even when he swears it tastes like dirt. You talk to him about the garden, about the snowdrops, about the first egg. Anything to remind him that the world is still here, waiting. And then, finally, the bell stops. Not because everyone's healed, not because the sickness is gone, but because it's slowed. Less knocking at doors, fewer whispers at dawn. You dare to feel hopeful. People start returning to the square, slowly, cautiously. You see a girl drawing with a stick in the mud. You see two boys chasing a chicken that absolutely does not want to be caught. You see the blacksmith hammering again, softly, as if not to wake the dead. You survived, again. You don't know how or why. Maybe because you were lucky. Maybe because you were careful. Maybe because you had to. But you're still here. You're tired and hollowed out and changed. But here, the fields are waiting. So is the sun. You've never known a spring to arrive so quietly. No trumpets of green, no bursting meadows or sudden balmy air. Just a gradual easing. Like the world is apologising for the past few months and offering peace in the form of slightly softer wind and sunlight that doesn't feel like a punishment. The change is in the small things, a daisy poking through the muck, your fingers not going numb while hauling water, your shoulders no longer hunching automatically every time you step outside. The village, once silent and folky, now hums again. Not loudly, not with confidence, but with cautious motion. Doors stay open longer, cloths get aired on fence posts, voices rise up in small talk about seedlings and blisters and whether or not the frost will return one last time to ruin everyone's hard work. Everyone agrees it probably will, but they plant anyway. You dig your hands into the soil again. This time it's different. Not ceremonial like last month, not just a symbolic poke at the earth to say, hey, we remember you, but actual work. Serious, callous-making, back-breaking work. You turn the dirt in long lines, straighten your rows, drop seeds in carefully, and cover them like secrets. Your hands are sore before noon, your back screaming by dusk, but you don't care. You're planting, which means you're not just enduring anymore, you're excamped. This is the pivot, the invisible line between survival and hope. Everyone's got their own strategy for what to plant first. Some go for onions, others swear by broad beans or barley. You stick with what you know, peas, leeks, cabbage. Things that grow even when they don't feel like it. Things that forgive you for not being an expert. You still ration your food, carefully, grudgingly. The root cellar looks like the scene of a crime, but a few wrinkled potatoes remain, and the last of the dried herbs might stretch another week. A neighbour gives you a loaf, dense, bitter, more stone than flour, but it feels like a luxury. You return the favour with 2 handfuls of firewood and a promise to help mend their roof. It's not charity, it's just survival etiquette. Historically, this was one of the hardest stretches of the year, the so-called hungry gap. After winter stores had been eaten or spoiled, but before the new crops were ready to harvest. In places without livestock or early spring forage, people lived on the edge. You understand now, you live on soup, not the good kind. What was this originally kind? But the foragers are back too. You see people out in the woods with baskets, looking for nettles, sorrel, garlic leaves. A girl down the road brings in a handful of mushrooms with the confidence of someone who either knows what she's doing or has made peace with death. You wish her luck. You find wild greens and boil them to mush. They taste like chewing a wet sock, but they're green. You eat seconds. One morning the goat gives birth. It's messy and loud and smells like everything unpleasant at once. But when it's done, there's a wobbly, confused creature blinking up at the world. You watch it stand on legs like reeds and feel something unlock in your chest. Not joy, not quite, just a deep, buried warmth that's been frozen for months and finally dares to stretch, as there's a superstition about springborn animals that the first ones are watched over by the spirits of those who didn't make it through winter. That when they bleat or chirp or squawk, they're saying thank you for getting someone else home. You don't know if you believe it, but you whisper a greeting to the kid anyway, just in case someone is listening. Repairs are everywhere now, roofs patched, wheels fixed, tools rebounded with fresh twine. You help replace a ladder rung and nearly impale yourself on a nail, but the satisfaction afterward makes the bruise worth it. The village looks better. Not brighter, mud still dominates the landscape, but less saggy, less haunted. You catch yourself laughing more, not loudly, not carelessly, but with real breath behind it. It feels strange at first, like your lungs forgot how, but it happens again and again. Sometimes even when nothing's funny, just because something in you needs to release the weight. You dream of harvest, not in detail, just flashes. A fat head of cabbage, a row of carrots, the sun on your neck instead of sleet. You dream of bread that isn't hard enough to dent your teeth, of milk, fresh and warm, of honey, of things with taste. One scholarly debate you overheard once, probably from a travelling monk who talked too much over dinner, was whether peasants actually loved the spring, or just endured it better than winter. The truth is messier. Spring hurts too, it's dirty, demanding. It forces you to move, to sweat, to hope, and hope after months of numbness is risky, but you still lean into it. Even knowing you might lose crops, even knowing another frost might come, even knowing someone else might fall ill before summer fully blooms, you lean into the light anyway. You mark the first day you wear only one layer outdoors. It's still cold, but your arms don't feel punished. You mark the first day the chickens lay more than one egg. You mark the first day someone sings in the village square, off-key but full-throated. These are your new calendar entries. The younger kids make flower crowns with whatever weeds they can find. They toss mud at each other and scream about dragons. You watch them and remember that joy doesn't need a reason, it just needs space. Winter didn't allow for it. Spring does. There's a festival soon. Nothing grand, just something to mark the changing of seasons. You hear whispers about what might be baked, what might be sung. You volunteer to help gather kindling for the bonfire. Not because you like bonfires, you're a little burned out on fire honestly, but because it feels right to contribute to something. You've made it to the other side. Thinner, sore, a little more cynical, but stronger in ways you didn't know were possible. You understand now that winter doesn't end. It leaves, slowly, suspiciously, and you must chase it out. You do that now, with seed, with sweat, with song, with stubbornness. Let it go. Spring is here.